Chapter 84. Just tell me when you're at your limit. Don't force yourself. Xiaoqing patted him on the shoulder and looked forward. There were only a few dozen meters left before they crossed the crevice. Gu Chuan nodded, but he still held on until his superpower was exhausted. Then, he sat down on the ground. Yan Pingshen became anxious when he stopped. The whole team was still on the ice, but Gu Chuan could no longer hold on. By the time Gu Chuan recovered, the ice bridge had already melted, and the whole team had fallen into the crevice. Before Yan Pingshen could ask, he saw Xiaoqing help Gu Chuan up. Then, she stretched out her right hand, and countless vines flew out. The vines were very flexible. They weaved themselves into the shape of a carpet in midair. Then, everyone saw a scene that made their jaws drop. The carpet, made of vines, fell down. Many tentacle-like vines stretched out from both ends, and like chopsticks piercing into tofu, they easily pierced into the soil on both sides of the crevice. When they tightened, they turned into a green bridge. Everyone was shocked. Most of them couldn't believe it. How could vines support such heavy off-road vehicles? Especially the off-road vehicles in the middle. They were all full of things. Xiaoqing had already helped Gu Chuan move forward. Yan Pingshen gritted his teeth and ordered, "Go forward." They couldn't stop halfway. The driver drove forward with trepidation. To everyone's surprise, the vines were very tough. Walking on them was like walking on solid ground. Only a slight dent under the tires told them that the vines were soft. After Xiaoqing walked past all the cracks, she turned around and saw the sunlight refracted by the ice and patches of tender green. She heaved a sigh of relief and helped Gu Chuan sit down. If there was a second choice, Xiaoqing definitely wouldn't let Gu Chuan do it. First, it would be too tiring. Second, it would expose their strength. The taboo thing for people was to be completely seen through by others. Xiaoqing was worried about that. However, compared to the huge loss of manpower and uncertainties, exposing one's strength was nothing. When all the cars passed through the crevice, Xiaoqing waved her hand gently. The vines turned into wood energy and returned to her body. This was the difference between her and other superpowered people. Other people's superpowers were used, but she could take them back. Although it was inevitable that she would consume some of her power during the process, compared to other people, she would consume less. This small difference might save her life in some life-or-death situations. Yan Pingshen had mixed feelings. When he and Meng Shen went to persuade Xiaoqing, they mentioned many times that they were interested in the strength of Xiaoqing's team. However, in fact, Yan Pingshen didn't care much about that. After all, he had seen the top superpowered people in the base, so his vision was much higher. In his opinion, Xiaoqing's team was at most a little stronger than other teams. The fact was that Gu Chuan's strength was already around level 3. Then, what about Xiaoqing, the team leader? What about the other members of her team? He seemed to have underestimated this superpowered team with a very strange name. Xiaoqing didn't say much. She helped Gu Chuan back to the car. After getting in, Xiaoqing asked Gu Chuan to go to the back seat to absorb the crystals. She sat in the front passenger seat with little Bun in her arms and continued to study the route. Yan Pingshen and the others had studied the route long ago. They knew which path to take was the least dangerous, which path to take was the shortest, and which path to take was the smoothest. However, Xiaoqing was a cautious person. She wasn't in the state where she could feed herself and her family. She had to keep a high level of vigilance. Chapter 85. Take this trip as an example. It was the safest route, but there was still an accident. Xiaoqing took the map and studied it carefully. If there was another accident, she could quickly find a second way out. she wouldn't be as helpless as she was this time. When they stopped for lunch in the afternoon, everyone's attitude towards Xiaoqing and the others was much better. After all, the strong always won more respect. After the meal, there was nothing much to do. It was not suitable to travel at night, but not many people could fall asleep so early in the morning. Therefore, at this time, it was usually time to chat, play cards, and communicate. Gu Chuan and the others were playing cards. Xiaoqing did not join them. She held Little Bun and chatted with Yen Ruru. As usual, there was an air dye by her side. Since that incident, air dye was particularly clingy. Even when it was free, it liked to sit beside her and look at her. Yen Ruru also had children at home. Unlike Xiaoqing, her husband loved her very much. Moreover, he was an ordinary person. It was not suitable for him to go out and do missions. Therefore, her family's model was that her husband took care of the children, and she went out to work. Naturally, the two mothers had a lot to talk about, especially about raising children. Although they were like chickens and ducks, they talked about different things. For example, Yen Ruru liked to talk about how much her baby ate for a meal, how he got fat again, and how he didn't like to sleep and was very noisy. Every time she came home, he would pester her to tell her stories. Xiaoqing liked to talk about how her little bun could eat a lot, but he didn't get fat or grow taller. He didn't like to sleep, but he didn't make trouble. Every night, he would pester her to sleep with him. Yen Ruru began to praise Little Bun, and Xiaoqing began to sigh. She was very annoyed that Little Bun didn't grow up. Gu Pan Pan, who was closer to them, had already made 3 mistakes. She wanted to laugh as she listened to their conversation. Even though the two of them were talking about similar things, they were still completely different from each other. If Yen Ruru understood Xiaoqing's meaning, she would probably be scared to death. How could a child from a normal family only eat crystals and not grow up? While Xiaoqing and Yen Ruru were chatting happily, Meng Shen was pushed over by Yen Pingshen. Meng Shen staggered and sat beside Xiaoqing, then asked, "What are you talking about? You look very happy." Xiaoqing said calmly, "We're talking about our son." Meng Shen fell silent. He had prepared a lot of things to say and thought about what Xiaoqing might be talking about. He even thought about how to perfectly follow up with the conversation. In the end, he realized that Xiaoqing was talking about children. Firstly, he didn't have children. Secondly, he didn't have any experience in taking care of children. Thirdly, he didn't have much contact with children. He realized that he couldn't get a word in. More importantly, there was an air dye next to them. As soon as Meng Shen got a little closer to Xiaoqing, the air dye would stare at Meng Shen like a dog protecting its food. It would quietly push Meng Shen when there was an opportunity. Meng Shen felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He couldn't get a word in, so he sat in silence for a long time. In the end, he left pitifully. After he left, Yen Ruru laughed in a low voice, "He's interested in you. The way he looks at you is quite complicated." "And the one next to you," Xiaoqing slapped the air dye and sighed. She rubbed the air dye's head and said, "He doesn't know anything. His feelings for me are probably just like how a baby bird feels for its mother." As for Meng Shen, Xiaoqing smiled and didn't say anything. She had already determined that Meng Shen wanted something from her. That was why he kept getting close to her. He didn't have any personal feelings for her. Xiaoqing had once thought about finding a father for Little Bun. At least, Little Bun could have a complete family and a more complete childhood. Her first thought was Yen Hanqing. Chapter 86. First, they were both soldiers, so they were more harmonious in certain aspects. Second, Yen Hanqing's character was more or less understood after this period of time. He was a trustworthy person. Third, Yen Hanqing would not treat Little Bun badly, and would be absolutely loyal to her. In the end, something unspeakable happened between her and Dai. Dai was never a good match in her heart, not because he was a zombie, but because Dai really did not know anything. Now Dai's feelings for her might be dependence or affection, but it would not be love, because he did not even have his own consciousness, only the most basic instincts. Dai like this could be a friend or a partner, but he was not suitable to be a lover. But fate made fools of people, and in the end, she and Dai did the most intimate thing. Not necessarily. Yen Ruru glanced at Dai. She had already classified Dai as someone who had a problem with his brain. To put it bluntly, he was an idiot. Yen Ruru said to Xiaoqing in an experienced tone, although he is stupid, his eyes are especially focused. Have you ever seen that, even if there are many people sitting next to him, there is no one else in his eyes except for you? It can be said that he only has you in his world. I think that the person who can be treated like this by him will be very happy. Xiaoqing was stunned, and then she heard Yen Ruru say, you should not deny his ability to be a lover because of some of his problems. Maybe you can try to understand and accept. At least in my opinion, he is sincere to you. In fact, it is good for you to be like this with him. At least he can't leave you, and he will not betray you. Xiaoqing forced a smile, you are very experienced. Let's not talk about this. It is quite late now, and it is time to sleep. Let's talk another day. Okay. Yen Ruru patted her butt and walked lazily to her tent. I'll talk to you another day. Xiaoqing carried Little Bun and turned around to see Dai sitting behind her, looking at her intently. She couldn't help but think about Yen Ruru's words. You're the only one in his eyes. You're his entire world. Wasn't this a kind of bone-deep romance? Xiaoqing couldn't accept Dai immediately, but Xiaoqing's attitude towards Dai had changed a lot. At least, she didn't treat her like a spoiled child anymore. Xiaoqing felt that when Dummy's level slowly increased in the future and his IQ recovered, his memory of his life might slowly awaken. If Dummy could say that he loved her at that time, then she would consider being with him. Even if she accepted Dai into her and Little Bun's life, it would be an Dai with a healthy mind and intelligence, and not an Dai like he was now. Xiaoqing brought Little Bun into the tent, and Dai followed. Xiaoqing was about to take off her coat when she saw Dai crawl under the blanket. Dai noticed Xiaoqing looking at him, so he lifted the blanket and patted it, indicating that he would warm the blanket for Xiaoqing and let Xiaoqing sleep in his arms. Xiaoqing was speechless. Ever since that incident, Dummy's attitude towards Xiaoqing had changed a lot. He looked at Xiaoqing as if he was looking at his own wife. He was especially happy, and in his joy, there was doting, and in his doting, there was also shyness. Dai was then kicked out. He persistently tried to crawl into the tent, but was kicked out again and again. Dai shamelessly tried to crawl into Xiaoqing's bed no matter what. After failing multiple times, he pitifully changed his target to crawling into the tent. He even hid in a corner so Xiaoqing couldn't kick him. Chapter 87. Xiaoqing let him off the hook and let him curl up in the corner, hugging his knees and curling up into a ball. He looked particularly miserable and pitiful. Xiaoqing hugged Little Bun and slept for a while. Then she woke up and couldn't help but look at Dai in the corner. Dai had curled up his slender body into a very small ball, which didn't take up much space. It was as if he was afraid that Xiaoqing would kick him out again. Xiaoqing's heart softened and she wanted to call Dai to the bed. In the end, she steeled her heart and turned over to continue sleeping. However, she couldn't sleep well. She kept thinking about Dai's pitiful appearance. After a while, she woke up again. When she turned over, she realized that Dai didn't seem to be in his original position. He moved forward a little. Although he didn't move much forward, he definitely moved a little. Xiaoqing closed her eyes and pretended that she was asleep. After a while, she squinted her eyes and saw Dai moving forward sneakily. He moved and moved until he was very close to the bed. Although he moved closer, Dai didn't dare to get into the bed. He just wanted to get closer to Xiaoqing so that he could look at Xiaoqing up close. Looking at Dai's pitiful appearance and even more pitiful eyes, Xiaoqing sighed. As soon as she spoke, Dai was startled. He quickly returned to his original position and lowered his head, pretending to be asleep. Xiaoqing was amused by him. She moved inside and made room for him. Then, she said to him, "Get into the bed and sleep, but don't move around. Don't disturb the baby. You have to sleep well." Dai was already hugging his head and prepared to be kicked out. When he heard Xiaoqing's words, he was so happy that he almost jumped up. Without another word, he took off his coat and crawled into the bed. Dai was worried that Xiaoqing would go back on her words, so he was very obedient once he got into the bed. He took up a small space and continued to curl up into a ball. When Xiaoqing and Dai slept in the same bed, if a normal person came in, they would probably rather sleep on the floor outside than sleep in the bed within 10 minutes. Because the bed was too cold, none of the three of them had a normal temperature. When she touched them, they were all cold as if they had just been taken out of the freezer. Even though there wasn't much warmth, Dai especially liked to lean on Xiaoqing when he fell asleep. Before he fell asleep, he remembered that he had to curl up into a ball and try not to take up any space. After he fell asleep, he began to unscrupulously stretch his body. The next morning, the three of them were like this. Xiaoqing was hugging Little Bun, Dai was hugging Xiaoqing's waist, and one of his legs was pressing down on Xiaoqing's leg. After Xiaoqing woke up, she mercilessly kicked Dai out of the bed. Dai didn't know what happened, but he was already outside the tent. His chin hit the ground first, and his face was blank. Therefore, when people passed by Xiaoqing's tent, they all saw Dai lying on the ground like a poor boy who was chased out of the house by his wife. The poor boy didn't feel that he was pitiful, so he happily went back into the tent again. He helped Xiaoqing pass socks, Xiaoqing's shoes, and Xiaoqing's coat. He was very attentive. Xiaoqing wasn't angry with him. She just found him interesting, so she kept a straight face. Dai didn't know. He thought that Xiaoqing was angry, so he kept looking at Xiaoqing pitifully, racking his brains to please his wife. He was afraid that Xiaoqing wouldn't let him into the bed at night. "Captain Xiao, you're up early." Yan Pingshan smiled and greeted him. "Have you eaten?" He deliberately emphasized the three words, Captain Xiao. When ordinary people heard this title, they would definitely be polite. For example, they would say, "Don't call me Captain X, just call me XX." Chapter 88. That way, Yan Pingshan could logically address Xiaoqing as Xiaoqing, Qing Qing, and so on. It was a more intimate form of address, and he would be able to close the distance between them. It was simply perfect. However, Xiaoqing had no intention of correcting him at all. She said lightly, "Team Leader Yan, you're early too. I just woke up. Is something the matter?" Yan Pingshan's heart was about to break down. He had just realized a very serious problem. Xiaoqing's brain was wired differently from a normal person's. Therefore, he had been using a normal way of thinking to communicate with Xiaoqing. As a result, their relationship was getting further and further apart. Just like this time, Xiaoqing had at least called him by his name previously. Now, she had directly addressed him as team leader. He had originally wanted to close the distance between them, but in the end, he had unknowingly pushed the distance away. Nothing much. If there's nothing else, I'll go wash up first. Xiaoqing smiled slightly. Her entire face revealed the message, since there's nothing else, hurry up and leave. Don't stay here and get in my way, okay? Yan Pingshan was especially aggrieved. He was so aggrieved that he wanted to cry. In the end, he decided to go back and organize his thoughts before fighting again. After Yan Pingshan left, Xiaoqing yawned, brushed her teeth, and washed her face. Air Dai and Little Bun had also been trained by Xiaoqing to have the habit of brushing their teeth no matter when and where, even if they were about to go out to fight. The three of them each had a freshly opened toothbrush. Xiaoqing had specially chosen a parent-child set. The one in her hand was for her mother, the one in Little Bun's hand was for the baby, and Air Dai's was for her father. Even his toothpaste cup was adorable. Little Bun was especially amusing when he was brushing his teeth. He always liked to brush and brush. After brushing for a while, he would take a mouthful of water and rinse his mouth with gurgling sounds. He looked like a little squirrel with a mouth full of pine nuts. Air Dai followed suit. The two squirrels, one big and one small, played very happily. When Xiaoqing finished rinsing her mouth, the two squirrels were still purring. Then, Air Dai was slapped on the back by Xiaoqing. He spat out saliva onto Meng Shen's pants. Meng Shen, who was completely passing by and innocently implicated, was speechless. Xiaoqing was a little embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't see you coming. Would you like me to take it off and wash it for you? Meng Shen saw that the key part of his pants was already wet, and the traces of wetness were still spreading. He was actually having a mental breakdown. He just wanted to get close to her and see if he could get any information related to the water purification. Then, he ended up like this. People who didn't know better would think that he had wet his pants. Meng Shen was about to refuse. It was just his pants that were wet. It was too bad of him to let Xiaoqing wash it. Just as he was about to refuse, he suddenly thought that this was also a way to get closer to Xiaoqing. He could take the opportunity to chat with her and become familiar with her. Hence, he said, I don't know how to wash clothes. It's really troublesome. It's not troublesome. Xiaoqing thought for a while and said, it will be too troublesome to change your clothes and send them back. I have Air Dai's clothes in my tent. They are new. I brought them from home. Both of you are about the same height, so you should be able to wear them. Okay. Meng Shen considered that he couldn't parade around with his pants wet, so he agreed. He was about the same height as Air Dai, but Air Dai was thinner. Hence, Meng Shen looked tighter when he wore Air Dai's clothes. I will send them to you when they are dry. Xiaoqing pinched Little Bun's cheeks to make him spit out the water. Then, she took a tissue and wiped Little Bun's mouth. Chapter 89. Well, I actually came here to ask you if you are interested in settling down in Zhongbei Survivor Base. Zhongbei Survivor Base may not have as good benefits as S-City Survivor Base, and the climate there is also worse than S-City Survivor Base, but... Meng Shen hesitated for a long time and found that he could not find an attractive reason. In the end, he could only say dryly, but I still hope that you can take your team and stay in our Zhongbei Survivor Base. The corner of Xiaoqing's eyes twitched. She had never seen someone persuade others like this. He pointed out the shortcomings of his own base, and in the end, he said dryly, do you want to come or not? Who would go there? Moreover, Xiaoqing's savings were all in S-City Survivor Base. Just the food she had saved during these days of missions was enough to make her reluctant to leave. If it was not to the point where she had to move, Xiaoqing would not be ready to leave S-City Survivor Base. Meng Shen also knew that his words were particularly unpersuasive, but he still couldn't help but say, when we arrive at Zhongbei Survivor Base, I will take you around. The people in our base are very nice. Maybe you will like it. He now felt that he was very useless. When he was with Yan Pingshan, he could make Yan Pingshan unable to say a word. When it came to Xiaoqing, he was so useless. Maybe he really should treat his social difficulties. Although Yan Pingshan always said that he couldn't control himself in front of beauty, he still felt that it was really necessary. Maybe. Xiaoqing was too embarrassed to refuse directly. She said euphemistically, "We are going to have breakfast. Have you eaten? Do you want to join us?" Meng Shen shook his head. "I have eaten. I will go back first. You guys eat." After Meng Shen left, Xiaoqing poured a glass of water for Xiao Bao to rinse his mouth. Dai was very dissatisfied with Xiaoqing's different treatment. He pouted and showed the circle of foam around his mouth to Xiaoqing, trying to let Xiaoqing wipe it for him. Then Xiaoqing slapped a piece of tissue on his face. Dai was speechless. After breakfast, they packed up their tents and other things and continued their journey. According to Yan Pingshan, the way back was much smoother than when they came. At this speed, they would be able to return to the Jiangbei survivor base in less than 10 days. Xiaoqing was not as optimistic as him. She looked at the map. The terrain of this area was not flat. There were mountains and hills. After this section of the road, they would arrive at a densely populated area. There would definitely be a lot of zombies. In the wild, they would face many unknown dangers. Otherwise, when Meng Shen and the others came, there would not be so many injured people. So now was not the time to relax. When she was in the S-City survivor base, she saw with her own eyes that a group of paranormals was ambushed by a group of ordinary zombies led by a high-level zombie very close to the base. People were like that. When they were at home, they were often the most relaxed. They were very close to the base, so they let their guard down. In the end, they were all wiped out. Naturally, the result was very miserable. After being bitten, paranormals would not become zombies. What awaited them was only to be slowly eaten. This was also a kind of fairness from God. After ordinary people were bitten, they would become zombies. Once paranormals were surrounded by zombies, they would either commit suicide or be eaten. According to this idea, maybe humans turning into zombies was another kind of evolution. Just like how humans evolved into paranormals, God couldn't be too unfair to ordinary people. Therefore, zombies were also evolving, and in the end, they might be the pinnacle of a species. Chapter 90. Xiaoqing didn't want to remind them. After all, Yan Pingshan and the others must be the elites of a base. If they couldn't even maintain the most basic vigilance, they wouldn't be qualified to be elites and represent a base to do business with another base. After passing through the mountain pass, we will be very close to the town. When we get there, we can enter the town and search. Many rural farmers will grow vegetables in their own homes. Maybe we can find something. Yan Pingshan's off-road vehicle and Xiaoqing's car were moving forward. He chatted with Xiaoqing for a while. If it was a small team of paranormals carrying enough rations, they wouldn't risk entering a town. But Yan Pingshan's team had a lot of people, so they didn't care about a small town. Xiaoqing didn't say anything. She just frowned and looked at the mountain pass in front of them. There was a road here, but it was built by the villagers. It divided the small mountain from the middle. The road was also ordinary cement road. Because it had been in disrepair for a long time, there were cracks everywhere. Fortunately, their off-road vehicle's performance was good. Climbing mountains was not a problem, not to mention such a road. Xiaoqing felt that something was wrong. In the middle of the broken road in front of them, there was a pile of straw and other things, lying flat on the ground. Moreover, there was a long stretch of the ground covered with wheat stalks. It was as if before doomsday, someone had left the wheat stalks on the ground and no one had taken them away. Speed up a little bit. Yan Pingshan shouted and looked at his watch. Before he could tell Xiaoqing the time, the first car fell with the wheat stalks. The car behind didn't stop in time and also fell in. It turned out that under the wheat stalks, there was a very deep pit. It was at least 10 meters deep. Ordinary cars that fell in would never be able to climb out. The third car braked and almost rear-ended it. Because everything happened too quickly, they weren't prepared at all. Everyone be careful. Yan Pingshan's face was very ugly. This big pit was dug by man. It was absolutely not natural. Didn't they see that someone had covered it with wheat stalks? But he didn't think about it. As a result, he was careless and almost lost 2 cars. The car leading the way belonged to the blazing team. Yan Ruru was also very angry. She sent people to rescue the people in the car while being vigilant. No one would dig such a pit for no reason. It must be premeditated. Everyone, please be careful. Yan Pingshan also sent people to rescue people. They were very vigilant, but they didn't know that some people were also very hesitant. This pit was dug by the survivors in the town ahead. Some of the survivors in their town went to the small survivor base nearby. Some of the more capable and brave ones went to the survivor base in S City. The rest of the group who didn't want to be controlled stayed here. There were about 30 people in the group, and 80% of them were paranormals. Because this road led to the Jiangbei survivor base, and it was the safest one, they had set up a trap there, specifically to trap passing vehicles. When Yan Pingshan and the others came, they took another road, so they didn't meet them. When they went back, they chose a safer road. As a result, they met them. This group of people were like bandits. Every day, a few people took turns to watch the big pit below. Once someone fell into the trap, they would call their companions to go down and pick up the meat. This group of people was cruel and merciless. Their principle was to kill the men and leave the women alive. They cut the weeds and the roots to prevent future troubles. Often, when people fell into the trap, the men were made into jerky and stored as food, and the women were raped and kept in captivity to play with. This group of people was also very smart. If they encountered a large number of paranormals, they wouldn't come out and let the other party leave. So until now, they had been very safe in this area. But this time, they met Yan Pingshan's team. There were nearly 30 people in Yan Pingshan's team. Even if only half of them were paranormals, they were still a tough stubble. Generally, in this kind of situation, they wouldn't come out. They would wait for Yan Pingshan and the others to leave, then they would set up the trap again and wait for the next prey. However, it was different this time. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that the carriages in the middle were filled with goods. Although they were covered with tarpaulins and couldn't see what the goods were, there were only 2 kinds of things that required so many carriages to transport. The first was food, and the second was fuel. It could also be all kinds of materials. In short, they were what they needed. If they did this, they wouldn't have to worry about food for the next 1 or 2 years. It was really a great temptation. But the number of people made them hesitate. The person in charge of the patrol gritted his teeth and said to his companion, "They can't move the cars out of the pit in a short time. You go and inform our boss that there is a big fat sheep coming. There are nearly 30 people, and the number of paranormals is unknown. They are transporting about 10 cars full of supplies. Ask our boss if he wants to do it." The companion nodded and went quietly. Their camp was nearby, built around the town. It didn't take much time for them to go back and forth, not to mention that he was a speed paranormal. He found the leader who was still on the woman's belly and said breathlessly at the door, "Boss, we met a fat sheep. This time, it's really a fat sheep. Should we do it?" A woman's shoe flew out and hit him in the face. Get the hell out of here. You almost scared me. If you have something to say it quickly. If you can't say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I will cut off your leg and pickle it. Chapter 91. This piece of fat meat was really too big. After listening to the subordinate, the leader pulled up his pants and gathered all his subordinates to go over. When they arrived, they saw that there were indeed 10 full cars. The ruts along the way were so deep, which meant that there must be a lot of things in the cars, and they were very heavy. There was a 50% chance that it was food, and a 50% chance that it was oil. The leader couldn't hold it in anymore. He gritted his teeth and asked, "Where's the second brother?" A skinny man with blue skin came over. "Big brother, I'm here. We're in the upper hand now. Do you have the confidence to take down half of them without being discovered?" The leader said gloomily. "I can try." The second brother calculated for a moment, then said, "As long as there's no wood-type healer among them, it won't be a problem to take down half of them." There were generally 2 types of wood-type paranormals. One was healing and assisting. That was to say, when such paranormals subdued their own plants, they would try their best to choose those that could heal and enhance their teammates. Of course, they would have the basic ability to protect themselves. The second type was controlling and assisting. For example, Shaoqing's vines and some wood-type paranormal's plants could release some toxins to weaken the enemy. This type of paranormals was mainly controlling. Shaoqing was a controlling and assisting assault-type paranormals. Usually, she could also assist her teammates. At a critical moment, she could become an assault-type paranormals in a second, controlling and assisting herself. Hearing this, the leader made up his mind. "Gather, gather. Take down this fat sheep. Everyone will get an extra bag of food. When we go back tonight, we can play with all the women at home." Although they didn't dare to cheer for fear of being discovered by Shaoqing and the others, everyone's face was full of excitement. Usually, they didn't have the chance to play with women. After all, there were very few women, and they usually didn't get a chance to play with them. Therefore, everyone had been in love with their left and right hands for a long time. Now, they were all staring at Shaoqing and the others with shining eyes. The second brother smiled wretchedly while pointing at Shaoqing and Yen Ruru. "Big brother, don't hurt those 2 beauties. Let's have a threesome tonight." The leader waved his hand and said, "If you can take them all down, I'll let you have a taste tonight." The second rubbed his hands and walked towards the wind tunnel. When he reached the wind tunnel, he smiled coldly and activated his ability. His ability was poison. When he first awakened it, it was mainly used to paralyze people. When he reached level 2, he had an additional type of poison that could paralyze people. Usually, when he encountered a large number of fat sheep, he would release the poison first. When those people were either paralyzed or unconscious, the others would rush forward and tie them up. Therefore, the leader valued him very much and gave him a lot of zombie crystal nuclei, hoping that he could reach level 3 as soon as possible. After all, when he was at level 2, he could only poison people who were above level 2. For paranormals who were above level 2, the effect of his poison was very small. If OL2 could reach level 3, with his special ability, he would be invincible. The colorless poison, with a faint fragrance, blended into the wind and slowly drifted to Shaoqing and the others. Yen Pingshan and Yen Ruru had just rescued people from the car and were commanding several strength-based paranormals to drag the car out. Shaoqing smelled a faint fragrance. Since her sense of taste and pain had been reduced to a very low level, her sense of smell and hearing had become particularly sensitive. More importantly, when she smelled that fragrance, the wood energy automatically circulated in her body, as if it was cleaning something. Chapter 92. At that moment, Xiaoqing understood. She hurriedly called out to the others, "Hold your breath. There's poison in the wind." Xiaoqing's words were timely, but some people were still poisoned. Those who were poisoned were all second-level paranormals and below. People like Yen Ruru only felt a little dizzy at most, because the poison couldn't enter her body at all. Even if some poison entered her body, it would be quickly removed by Yen Ruru's energy. Another example was Xiao Tong. She had the habit of setting up a simple spirit shield around her at all times, so the poison would be removed as soon as it touched the shield. It couldn't hurt Xiao Tong at all. Moreover, some paranormals who were at the peak of second level and not far from third level were also not affected. They could be removed in a short while. However, those who were hiding in the dark didn't know that. They only saw a large number of people fall down. The leader suddenly became excited, as if the fat sheep had already entered his pocket. "Brothers, let's go. Capture the women alive, and don't leave the men alive." A group of people rushed down. Yen Ruru was very calm. She ordered the rest of the people to move the poisoned ones back. If they were accidentally hurt during the fight, they would have nowhere to cry. Xiaoqing also saw Yen Ruru's thoughts. She stepped forward and asked, "Who are you? Little girl, is there something wrong with your brain?" "I'm your husband." The leader laughed lewdly and said, "Didn't we sleep together last night? You don't recognize me now after putting on your pants." Xiaoqing's eyes immediately became cold. Dai was about to rush out and attack, but he was stopped by Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing smiled faintly. "What did you just say? I didn't hear you clearly." "I said I'm your husband, and I also like the little girl behind you. How about you serve me tonight? She's so young." "Second brother, don't you think they look like mother and son?" How could the leader be afraid of Xiaoqing? There were only 10 people on her side, but they had nearly 30 people on their side, and all of them were paranormals. Second brother immediately chimed in, "To be able to fuck a mother and daughter, boss, your luck with women isn't shallow. How about you let me have the hot chick next to you?" "No problem, we brothers should share our blessings." The leader laughed. Xiaoqing looked at Yen Ruru, and then looked at the captain of Mengshen's team. Although she was asking, her tone was very cold. "How about leaving the two of them to me?" Yen Ruru's weapon was a whip. It was made of the spine of a mutated tiger and had been specially processed. She didn't ask Xiaoqing if she could use it. She just said, "Lend me that ice element guy over there. I'll get rid of all the troublesome minions for you." The other captain also nodded. "Do what you can. Be careful. If you can't do it, call us for help." Hearing this, the leader laughed and immediately waved his hand. "Brothers, they look down on us. Come on, let's fight together. Let's end this quickly. Kill all the men and bring the women back so that everyone can have some fun." Those who were temporarily paralyzed were dragged to the back. Without any consideration, no one would talk nonsense with them. Xiaoqing let Yan Hanqing and the others choose to kill those who were not pleasing to the eye, while she faced the leader and second brother. Xiaoqing's eyes were filled with killing intent that was about to explode. She stretched out her hand, and green vines shot towards the two men. The second brother's first reaction was to hide behind the leader and release the poison. His poison was too disgusting. Although it wouldn't harm people's lives, it made people unable to move freely. The leader hurriedly used his power. His power was the same as Yen Ruru's, which was fire. The difference was that he was a little weaker than Yen Ruru. Chapter 93. As soon as the flames touched the vines, black smoke floated up. The poison on the surface of the vines was evaporated by the flames. When the leader saw the black smoke, he was shocked. He hurriedly formed a fire shield in front of him, but the vines with black smoke went around him. Then, a scream came from behind him. When the leader turned around, his face was splashed with blood. Those vines were like sharp cones, easily piercing the second brother's body. Some pierced his stomach, some pierced his chest, and some pierced his neck. Then, in the next second, the second brother's body was torn apart by the waving vines. Only his head was intact. It rolled around on the ground, then stopped moving toward the leader. The second brother's face was still a bit lustful. Until he died, he didn't realize how he died. He was still immersed in the illusion of victory. His limbs, flesh, and internal organs were scattered everywhere along with his body. The leader wiped his face and his hand was stained with blood and minced meat. There was also a piece of internal organ that he couldn't tell which organ it was. The warm blood splashed into his eyes and mouth. In an instant, he realized that this time, he seemed to have provoked someone he shouldn't have. Especially when he saw Yen Ru and the others slaughtering his subordinates one-sidedly. Even though they had fewer people, the leader wanted to run away at that moment. After all, his brothers had lost everything, and his subordinates had lost everything. He could still find another one, and there was still a chance for him to make a comeback. After all, he was already a level 3 paranormal, but what if he died? If he died, he would have nothing left. But would Xiaoqing let him run away? Seeing him release a fire shield to stop the vines from getting closer and sneakily look around to escape, Xiaoqing sneered. Little Tong. Xiao Tong immediately released her power. When Xiao Tong was a level 1 paranormal, she could only release a shield to protect herself and her companions. This was probably because she had been beaten and scolded since she was young, which caused her to have an extreme desire for a sense of security. That was why this ability appeared when she awakened. When she reached level 2, Xiao Tong's biggest desire was to help Xiaoqing instead of feeling safe. Thus, she gained a second ability, which also gave her the ability to attack. The invisible spiritual power hit the leader's head in an instant. When Xiao Tong was a little stronger, she could even use this ability to blow up other people's heads invisibly. Unfortunately, she was still a little weak now. All she could do was make the leader feel a sharp pain in his head and temporarily lose his consciousness. That was enough. In an instant, the dense fire shields around the leader dissipated along with his spirit. The vines took advantage of this opportunity to invade. Although the leader had already woken up at this time, it was already too late. The vines had already wrapped around his neck and limbs. The leader hurriedly released flames to burn the vines, but the paralyzing and corrosive poison had already entered his body through the thorns on the vines. As the poison spread, the flames became weaker and weaker. The vines also slowly tightened, strangling him to the point that his tongue was about to be stuck out. Let me go. I know I was wrong. The leader rolled his eyes as he was strangled. He said intermittently, I saved a lot of food, and money, and crystal nuclei. I'll give them all to you. I'll tell you where those things are. Don't kill me. Yan Pingshan also walked over. Ah Qing, let him live first. Then Yan Pingshan saw the vines suddenly tighten, and the thorns instantly lengthened, piercing into the leader's neck. Even though he was so far away, Yan Pingshan could hear the sound of bones breaking. Chapter 94. The first thing that fell was the leader's arm, followed by his legs, and finally his head. In an instant, only his body was left hanging in the air by the vines. Xiaoqing turned around and smiled embarrassedly. You were a little slow, so I was a little faster. I'm sorry. Yan Pingshan silently swallowed his next words and said flatteringly, good job. He just wanted to ask if there was a place to grow crops in the town. Xiaoqing was too cruel. Fortunately, there were still many small fries left, so he could ask them one by one. Your leaders are all dead. Surrender. Yenruru waved her long whip, which was covered with a layer of dark flame. Whoever it landed on would have their skin and flesh burnt and their bones broken. Those small fries were about to surrender, but Xiaoqing shouted, "Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive." Yenruru looked at Xiaoqing doubtfully. After all, it was a little cruel to kill them all. After all, although the leader was very bad, some of his subordinates might have been coerced. Xiaoqing smiled coldly and said, "Ask them. Which one of them hasn't eaten human flesh? Which one of them hasn't killed? Didn't you hear that sentence? Kill all the men and capture all the women alive. They have already harmed so many people. Even if they were unwilling at the beginning, now. I'm afraid they like this kind of life more than anyone else. They only need to plunder and kill to live a good life." Yenruru also reacted and waved her hand. "Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive." Perhaps Xiaoqing's method of dealing with them was very rough, but she was right. These people had long fallen. Even if they were let go, they would still find another place to continue robbing. After tasting the pleasure of reaping without sowing, they could not change. Instead of letting them continue to harm others, it was better to kill them all and take it as a good thing. Soon, those small fries were almost all killed, leaving only one who looked a little younger. Yenru kicked him and said, "Lead the way for us later. We'll go to your lair, understand?" I know," the young man with multicolored hair said in a trembling voice. At this time, those paranormals who had been temporarily paralyzed had not recovered, because Xiaoqing and the others had ended the battle too quickly. Yenruru led her people to clean up the battlefield. The big pit dug by the robbers was very useful. After all the corpses were dug out, they were thrown into the big pit. Finally, the Earth paranormals worked together to fill up the big pit. When they buried the corpses, they cried. The leader's body was fine. Although his body was torn apart, it was still whole. But the second leader's body was pitiful. Except for his head, even his internal organs were broken into pieces. The cleaners had no choice but to find a shovel and shovel them into the pit. While they were cleaning up, the young captive asked softly, "Aren't you going to leave the corpses behind? It's a pity to bury so much meat." Yenruru patted Xiaoqing on the shoulder. "You're right. Now I even feel that it's too merciful to just kill them. When we get to their nest later, I'm sure you can't wait to dig them all out and cut them into pieces," Xiaoqing said expressionlessly. After cleaning up, except for the mottled blood on the ground, there was nothing else to prove that a big battle had just taken place here. At this time, those paranormals gradually recovered. Xiaoqing and the others got in the car and went to their nest under the guidance of the young captive. Chapter 95. After passing the mountain pass, they would arrive at the town not far away. Their base was located between the town and the mountain. They had built their base well, surrounded by thick wooden fences. Inside the base should be the houses on the edge of the town, which had been occupied by them. When the off-road vehicles stopped outside, some people who stayed behind secretly looked out. Yenruru escorted the young captive out of the vehicle, followed by a large number of people. Those who stayed behind were immediately frightened. "Break in." Xiaoqing was the first to make a move. Vines flew out in an instant and tore apart the guardrails on both sides. Gu Panpan took the lead and slammed into the guardrails with her body. The iron gate flew out along with half of the guardrails. Xiaoqing led the group of paranormals behind her and rushed in, knocking down the few paranormals who stayed behind at the gate in minutes. "I'll bring some people over to take a look and ransack their warehouse." Yan Pingshan rubbed his palms and was very happy. Xiaoqing and Yan Ruru took some people to search for survivors. Fortunately, this small stronghold was not big, so the search was very fast. Several paranormals who hid in the stronghold were soon found, along with a group of women. It was a group of women with abnormal mental states. They were all dressed in rags and skinny. 6 or 7 out of 10 of them had lifeless eyes. Some of them even began to take off their clothes when they saw that someone was coming. Their bodies were covered with scars of all kinds. It was a ghastly sight. Some of the women's bodies had been ravaged to the point that it was unbearable to look at. Yan Ruru suddenly understood why Xiaoqing had told her that once they reached this place, she would not be able to resist pulling out the corpses from the pit and shredding them into pieces. Because she really wanted to do that now. In the post-apocalyptic world, women were originally a vulnerable group, not to mention encountering such a group of beasts. Yan Ruru turned her head away, tears coming out. She was actually a very emotional woman. Seeing them in such a miserable state, she was about to go crazy from anger. She was almost unable to bear it. The group of male paranormals consciously went out, leaving Xiaoqing and the other women to dress these women. Not all of the women were crazy. Some of them were still sane. One of the women asked tentatively, "Were you also captured?" Xiaoqing shook her head, "You are free now. We have killed all the bandits here. No one will force you anymore." All of a sudden, those women seemed to have gone crazy as they pounced on a woman in the corner. That woman was wearing a very beautiful dress. The hem of her dress had traces of being deliberately torn and smeared with dirt. The woman screamed, "What are you doing?" She was pinned down in the middle by a group of crazy women, and screams immediately rang out. These women were all ordinary people, and they only knew how to scratch and bite. However, each of them wanted to eat her up, and they viciously tore off piece after piece of meat. Soon the ground was covered with blood, and so were their bodies. They really looked like a group of lunatics. That woman was bitten to death. When she died, there was no intact part of her body. The woman who spoke first wiped the blood from her mouth and spat, "We were all captured and humiliated, but this woman clung on to that bastard and helped him torture us. Several of our sisters were tortured to death just like that. Among them were 2 children, one 13 years old and the other 16 years old. I'd like to see what color her heart is. No matter what happened, it's over now. Don't be sad." Yan Ruru didn't know how to comfort them. She just wiped her tears and said, "Anyway, you are free now." The woman's eyes lit up, and then dimmed. She held her legs and began to cry. Her crying infected the other women, and soon they all cried together. Xiaoqing waited patiently for them to stop crying. When they slowly sobbed, she said softly, "There is a Jiangbei survivor base in front of us, and there is a survivor base in S City behind us. There are also some small bases nearby, but they are not as safe as the big ones. You can consider where to settle down." Chapter 96. The few sensible girls looked at each other, but no one said anything in the end. No matter which base they went to, they had to walk a long way. Besides, they were a group of girls, so it was not safe for them to go anywhere. There was no guarantee in a small base. It was inevitable that some people would see them as girls and do something bad to them, or even imprison them. How much better would that situation be than now? If they went to a big base, it would be much safer. However, they were all weak girls, ordinary people, and some of them were not sane. It was such a long way to go to a big base. How many of them could reach there alive? Women who could live until now without going crazy were all very smart and had high endurance. Regarding the above conclusion, everyone was very clear, but no one said anything. Because they all knew that no one had any obligation to take a group of useless women with them. In particular, there were several girls who had already gone crazy. They would only be a burden. Smart people would not choose to take them with them. Yan Ruru looked at Xiao Qing with some embarrassment. She also knew this, so even if she sympathized with these women, she did not say that she would take them with her. If they were near S city base, and there were only her own team of paranormals, she would dare to say that. However, she was now on a mission. Yan Pingshan was her employer, and she was just a mercenary. Therefore, she could not make this decision. Xiao Qing did not say anything. She was silent for a long time, and then said to Yan Ruru, "Take them out and find Yan Pingshan." This kind of hot potato was better left to Yan Pingshan. After all, Yan Pingshan was the employer, so it was better to let him make the decision. Yan Ruru nodded and breathed a sigh of relief. She put on the girls' clothes and took them out. Yan Pingshan had found the warehouse and was directing people to move things out. There were several captives tied up together beside him. Although a lot of things were moved out, there was no happy expression on his face. Xiao Qing walked over and found that most of the things in the warehouse were corpses. The corpses had been cleaned clean, their internal organs had been removed, and their heads had been cut off. After soaking them in salt water, they were split in half from the middle and hung on hooks like slaughtered pigs and dogs. There were at least 50 to 60 corpses hanging in the left and right rows. Some of them were tall and seemed to be adult men. Some of them were short and were probably underage. It was no wonder that Yan Pingshan's expression was so ugly. Anyone who saw such a tragedy would have an ugly expression. When the women saw the captives beside Yan Pingshan, they clenched their teeth and wanted to pounce on them. But since Xiao Qing and the others didn't say anything, they didn't dare to do anything rashly. However, a woman who looked to be in her 30s and had a great figure pounced on them. Her hair was disheveled. After pouncing on them, she bit one of them on the throat. Everyone heard a clear scream and the sound of blood pouring down her throat. Gulp, gulp. The other woman hurriedly said, "Please don't be angry." Her sister was still pregnant when she was raped by this man. After that, the man even cut out the child in her dead sister's belly just to see the gender. Then, he fed the child to wild dogs. From that day on, she went crazy. Xiao Qing wasn't angry at all. She used vines to pull the captives who were still alive out one by one and asked the women, "Live or die?" The captives kept begging for mercy and repenting, but the women were very determined. This kind of beast, it's too easy for them to die. Chapter 97. Xiao Qing dismembered the captives one by one in front of these women, but no one thought that she was cruel. After seeing everything in this stronghold, everyone felt that they could not atone for their sins even if they died 10,000 times. After moving out the supplies and burying the pickled corpses, Yan Pingshan said fiercely, "I must burn this place to vent my hatred. Let's deal with them first." Xiao Qing briefly explained the origin of these women, and then threw the most important question to Yan Pingshan. "Now they have nowhere to go. You are the employer. What do you think we should do?" Yan Pingshan stared and was a little confused. Xiao Qing really gave him a difficult problem. No matter how he dealt with these women, there would be problems. If he left them to their own devices, he would not be able to live with his conscience. If he brought them along, the danger along the way would be a lot greater. Moreover, if they really encountered an accident, these women would only be a burden. Mengshan said, "I suggest that we bring them along. What do you think of the two captains? Although we are the employer, your opinions are also very important." "I have no opinion," Yan Ruru hurriedly said. Xiao Qing glanced at the women and changed her view of Mengshan. She said lightly, "If we bring you along, you will be responsible for cooking and cleaning. You don't have any opinion, right?" The women were very surprised and nodded. How could they have any opinion? They were even very grateful to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing made them feel that they were still somewhat useful. Then let's bring them. Anyway, there are only 6 women. Sister Yan can bring 3, and I can bring 3. Xiaoqing said calmly, have you moved everything out? If you have, let's go. Okay. Yan Pingshan also nodded, and the group of people left. Before leaving, Yan Ruru set a fire. They only left after seeing this evil place turn into ashes with their own eyes. The women secretly wiped away their tears. They had suffered too much in this place. They had lost all their loved ones and in the end, they had nothing left. Xiaoqing found some clothes in her space and asked them to change out of the shabby clothes that couldn't cover their bodies. Xiaotong also took some medicine for treating wounds. When she heard Xiaotong's thanks, she blushed. After taking in these women, they entered the town. It was said that these women were usually asked to go to the town's vegetable garden with a few ordinary people, so they were very familiar with the way to the vegetable garden. Yan Pingshan and his men picked all the vegetables that had grown. Although they had harvested a lot and could have a fresh lunch in a while, no one felt happy. Everything that they had seen today was too heavy for them to be happy. The women in the team were very nervous. They rushed to do everything, such as cooking. Xiaoqing never stopped them, because she knew that doing these things would make them feel more at ease. Leave the cooking to Hanqing. He is very good at cooking. You have been tired for a day. Take a rest. Xiaoqing ordered the vines to retract their thorns and arrange them into the shape of a bench. Sitting on the bench was exceptionally elastic, and it was cool enough not to hurt one's butt. Dai and the others sat at the side, waiting for the meal. The 3 women were very embarrassed and sat down after setting the table. Xiaoqing saw that they were nervous and didn't say anything. They couldn't relax for a while. Auntie, some candy. Little Baozi walked with his short legs and distributed the candy to the women. He blinked his big eyes and was so cute. The 3 women were at a loss as to what to do as they held the candy. One of them was the woman who had pounced on the captive and bitten his throat. She had been so fierce before, and her eyes were bloodshot. She had bitten a captive's throat in a frenzy, but now, she was like a child. She was at a loss as to what to do as she held the candy. In the end, she gently patted Little Bun's head. Chapter 98. Her movements were very gentle and careful. It was as if she would hurt the little bun if she used too much force. Another woman who was sane couldn't help but ask, "Is this your child? He's so cute. You don't have to call me yours. Just call me by my name. My name is Xiaoqing." Xiaoqing whispered, "This is my son." "What's his name?" The woman was a little embarrassed. "He's really cute. I like him very much. My name is Xiang Ru. This is Shang Xiaofan. This is Tao Jingjing." Xiaoqing was stunned. She just realized that she had been calling the little bun baby all the time. She hadn't given the little bun a name yet. Naming was a big deal. It needed to be carefully considered and pondered. Of course, for a person who was bad at naming, naming was as painful as fighting a level 4 zombie alone. Actually, I haven't given him a name yet. Xiaoqing couldn't bring herself to say it. Finally, she said vaguely, "His nickname is Bao Bao. You can call him Bao Bao." "Bao Bao?" Xiang Ru asked carefully, "Can I kiss him?" Before Xiaoqing said anything, the little bun took the initiative and kissed Xiang Ru. Xiang Ru held her face and was very happy. Xiaoqing couldn't help but smile. She picked up the little bun and turned her face to the little bun. The little bun came over and kissed her a few times. Xiang Ru sat on the side and was very envious. After a while, she smiled and said, "It's so happy to have such a little baby by your side." Okay. Xiaoqing's eyes were full of tenderness. The little bun was her biggest motivation. Normally, even the cleverest housewife could not cook without rice. With limited ingredients, what Yan Hanqing could cook was also limited. Now that he had an abundance of ingredients, he made 6 dishes and a soup in one go. Although they were all vegetarian dishes, they looked, smelled, and looked appetizing. A group of people gathered around to eat, which made Yan Pingshan and the others drool. After all, there was a gap between chefs. The gap between their chefs and Yan Hanqing was like the gap between a beginner who had learned how to cook and a person who had learned how to cook through the system. If there was a comparison, there would be harm. The women didn't dare to fill the bowl with rice. Xiaoqing filled the bowl with rice and handed it to them. She also put some food into their bowls. There are a lot of dishes. Help yourselves. Only when you are full will you have the strength to clean up the dishes. She had eaten very little, and she had forced herself to eat. She would have to spit it out later. If it weren't for the fact that she wanted to fool others, she wouldn't have eaten a single bite. After lunch, they didn't continue to move forward. Instead, they stayed in the town to rest temporarily. At least the town had been cleaned up, and there were few zombies. They found a 3-story building along the street and could have a good rest for the day. After all, it was not only their bodies that were tired, but also their minds that were on high alert. If they could rest, it would be good for the rest of the journey. Xiaoqing went back to her room after lunch. Then, Xiaoqing and Air Dai surrounded the trash can and vomited for a while. After vomiting, they took Little Bun and began to absorb a pile of crystal stones. Little Bun could absorb some high-calorie and nutritious things, but they couldn't eat raw food, let alone flesh and blood. They could only use crystal stones to maintain their strength. They spent the whole day and night in their room absorbing crystal stones. They only showed their faces during lunch. The next morning, Xiaoqing didn't need much sleep, so she got up early. But when she got up, the 3 women were already packing their things. Xiaoqing couldn't help but frown and went downstairs. "It's only 5 o'clock. I'm sorry, did we wake you up?" Xiang Ru said with some panic. Xiaoqing shook her head and said to them, "What you need to do is to have a good rest, and then you will have the energy to hurry on the road. I don't need you to be too diligent, as long as you don't drag us down." Her words were not pleasant to hear, and her voice was very cold. Xiang Ru whispered, "You are a good person." Xiaoqing was stunned for a moment. No one had ever given her a good person card. Her teammates said that she was a trustworthy and dependable person, and people couldn't help but regard her as the backbone. Her enemies said that she was cruel and ruthless, and was a lone wolf. People who didn't know her said that she was cold and unapproachable. Xiang Ru was the first person to say that she was a good person. She couldn't help but turn her head. Her face was still expressionless, but her earlobes were slightly red. "How am I a good person? Haven't you seen how I kill people? You are really a good person." Xiang Ru couldn't help but raise her voice and said with some eagerness, "Although you look cold on the surface, you are more considerate than those who comfort us with warm words, and you are very hot-blooded and righteous. You are a very, very good person." Xiaoqing couldn't help but sneer, "You are so sleepy that you are hallucinating. Go to sleep, and we will be on the road in a while." Xiang Ru looked at Xiaoqing's back as she left, pulled the 2 sisters who were not very normal, and whispered, "Really? Thank you very much." Xiaoqing couldn't help but laugh. How did she act like a good person? After she killed those bandits, even the people of the Blaze team and Yan Pingshan's side would be afraid of her, right? They were really naive to think that she was a good person. She was clearly a cold-blooded, ruthless person who always thought of herself. How could she give others the illusion that she was a good person? As soon as Xiaoqing went out, she saw Mengshen sitting at the door, wiping a dagger. His eyes were very serious, as if he was actually in a laboratory, doing the kind of experiment that couldn't go wrong. This attitude towards weapons once again pleased Xiaoqing, and made Xiaoqing's impression of Mengshen a little better. Chapter 99. It's a beautiful dagger. Mengshen was stunned for a moment. He probably didn't expect Xiaoqing to take the initiative to talk to him. He said shyly, "A very important person gave it to me." "Someone you like? Can I have a look?" Xiaoqing had an indescribable love for cold weapons. She had once bought a cabinet to store short weapons. It was filled with all kinds of military knives, bayonets, daggers, and short swords. Mengshen hesitated for a moment, then handed the dagger to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing held the dagger and looked at it carefully. This was a dagger used to kill people. Ordinary ornamental daggers wouldn't be sharpened. Although the daggers sold privately could be sharpened, they weren't standard. As for this single-edged dagger, although the back and hilt of the dagger were decorated with gorgeous and ancient patterns, it was easy for people to mistake it as an ornamental dagger. However, from the blade to the tip, it was prepared to kill people. Xiaoqing's favorite dagger was the double-edged plum blossom dagger. There was a crescent blade at the grip, beautiful and sharp. Most importantly, the plum blossom dagger was the most suitable weapon for women. However, the first dagger she received was a single-edged dagger. It was given to her by her instructor. At that time, she wasn't used to using bayonets, so she relied on this dagger when she went out on missions. However, during one mission, she was seriously injured and lost the dagger. No matter how Xiaoqing looked at it, she felt that the dagger looked very familiar. It looked very much like the first dagger she had thrown away. Just as she was about to take a closer look, Mengshen whispered, "That. Have you finished looking at it?" Xiaoqing glanced at Mengshen, who looked as if she would snatch the dagger away from him. She handed the dagger to him and asked casually, "Where did you get this dagger?" "It's pretty. Someone gave it to me." Mengshen hesitated for a moment, then said. He took the dagger, carefully wiped it with a soft cloth, and finally put it into the scabbard. "Is that so?" Xiaoqing didn't say anything. She just faintly said, "I think this dagger looks very familiar. It seems like I've seen it a long time ago." Mengshen's eyes immediately lit up. He quickly asked, "You've seen it? Who was using it? Can you still find her?" Xiaoqing quickly analyzed Mengshen's words. Finally, she said tentatively, "When I saw it, the owner of this dagger was called Blue Phoenix." "Yes, that's her." Mengshen was so surprised that his cheeks were flushed red. There was no trace of his previous indifference. "Where is she now? Can you still find her?" Xiaoqing didn't answer his question. Instead, she asked, "How do you know her? How did this dagger end up in your hands?" Mengshen was a little hesitant. After a while, he looked like he was going to cut off all means of retreat and said, "Actually, I don't know her. I've only seen her once, and she was wearing a gas mask. At that time, I was a researcher in charge of researching drugs. We developed an effective anti-cancer drug, but before we could submit the research results, they were stolen by a spy." Thinking of the past, Mengshen's expression became a little cold. "Because of some accident, the research institute was blown up, and I was crushed under a stone slab. It was her. Blue Phoenix saved me. She left the dagger for me to protect myself." When he finished speaking, his cold expression was instantly melted by tenderness. Xiaoqing couldn't help but shiver. At that time, the situation was urgent. Xiaoqing didn't have time to send Mengshen out. She could only call for help. Then, she got Mengshen's leg out from under the stone slab. After that, she found a place to put him down and chased after the spy. At that time, she left a dagger for Mengshen. She wanted to take it back after the incident. However, she was seriously injured and laid in the hospital for 3 months. She broke 3 ribs and had a comminuted fracture in one of her legs. Other minor injuries were needless to say. After she recovered, she was discharged from the army. Chapter 100. In the end, he didn't get the dagger back. Xiaoqing wasn't going to tell Mengshen that she was Blue Phoenix. She didn't want to bring up the past again. Looking at Mengshen's expectant eyes, Xiaoqing originally wanted to say that Blue Phoenix was already dead. However, in the end, she couldn't help but change her words. She was injured. After recovering, her body couldn't keep up with the intensity of the mission. So, she retired from the army. I heard that she transferred to work and went home to marry and have children. Mengshen opened his mouth, but no words came out. He lowered his head slightly, unable to hide the disappointment on his face. After a long time, he said, "I'm relieved that she's doing well. Originally, I wanted to return the dagger to her. She doesn't need it anymore." Xiaoqing stood up. "I'll go see if dinner is ready." Mengshen nodded his head, tightly gripping the dagger. There were some things that he couldn't forget. Every night, he would dream of that white hand gently pulling him up. Even in the smoke-filled space, he could smell the faint fragrance on her body. It was very faint. He had tried to find out the people who participated in that mission several times. However, Xiaoqing was in a secret unit, so she couldn't reveal any information. The only thing Mengshen knew was that she was called Blue Phoenix. Then, after a very long time, just when he thought he would never be able to find her again or hear any news about her, Xiaoqing told him that the person of his dreams had retired from the army and returned home to get married. In the end, it was just an illusory one-sided love. Perhaps even until her death, Blue Phoenix wouldn't know that there was someone who fell in love with her at first sight. Seeing that Xiaoqing was about to walk up the stairs, Mengshen couldn't help but ask, "What's her real name?" Xiaoqing paused, shook her head, and went upstairs. Yan Hanqing came out of the kitchen wearing an apron. The apron was provided by Xiaoqing. It was a pink floral apron, which looked very girlish. In the beginning, Yan Hanqing was still a little embarrassed, but now he could calmly wear an apron and cook. "I've boiled fresh milk for the baby. Do you want some sugar?" Yan Hanqing asked in a low voice. Xiaoqing thought for a while and answered according to little Baozi's preference, "A spoonful of sugar. He won't be able to digest any more than that and will spit it out in the end." Yan Hanqing nodded and turned around to add more sugar. His back was very broad, and his back was as solid as a mountain, filled with a sense of security. Now, he was wearing a pink apron. It looked a little funny, but it made Xiaoqing feel warm and at ease. For someone like her, who was used to going through life and death situations and hovering on the edge of death, what she yearned for the most was warmth and a sense of security. So when Lin Qifan showered her with gentleness, she fell for him so quickly. At that time, Xiaoqing felt that she had found someone to rely on for the rest of her life. She had found a man who was willing to be her solid support. Later, she found out that there was a kind of man who wore a gentle coat and was used to sweet-talking. He threw his conscience out of the window. Xiaoqing leaned against the door frame and sighed, "If only the person I met in the beginning was you. How good would that be?" Yan Hanqing's hand couldn't help but tremble, and he added half a spoonful of sugar. He silently stirred the milk with a spoon to prevent it from spilling out. When it was almost done, he turned off the fire and brought the pot of milk down. "I'll go wake the baby up." Xiaoqing didn't say anything else and returned to her room. Naturally, she couldn't see how gentle Yan Hanqing's gaze was when he looked at her. After waking little Baozi up and drinking the milk, Xiao Qing wiped little Baozi's milk beard clean before carrying him out for a walk. Chapter 101. Those who had just woken up, those who were washing up, and those who were going downstairs all heard the alarm. Two of them hurriedly ran downstairs without pulling up their pants. As soon as they came downstairs, they saw Yan Ru'er standing in the hall with a bad look. She said to them, "Go out and gather." As a representative of those who hadn't pulled up their pants yet, Yan Pingshan ran downstairs while tying his belt. When he saw Yan Ru'er, he asked, "What happened? Is it a zombie riot? We'll know when we get to the door." Yan Ru'er waved her hand. "Everyone, gather at the entrance. Leader Yan, call your men down as well." Okay. Although they didn't know what happened, it was definitely not a zombie riot. Otherwise, Yan Ru'er wouldn't be so calm. Yan Pingshan breathed a sigh of relief. He tied his belt and called the others down. Meng Shen was much calmer than him. At least his clothes were neat. When they arrived at the door, they found Xiao Qing standing there. Her body was surrounded by dancing vines. One of the vines was binding a pig's face that had been beaten so badly that even his mother couldn't recognize him. When everyone was there, Xiao Qing asked, "Who was patrolling last night?" Two young men stood up. One was from Yan Pingshan's side, and the other was from Yan Ru'er's side. She gave each of them a whip without saying a word. They all whipped their legs. The legs of their pants were torn, revealing their red and swollen skin. "Were you sleeping when you patrolled last night? Someone sneaked into those girls' rooms and raped them. Didn't you find out?" Xiao Qing didn't seem to have any big emotional fluctuations. Her voice was very calm, but it made them tremble with fear. Suddenly being beaten, the two who were still angry immediately felt ashamed and stopped talking. It was their fault. What's more, they did slack off last night. They thought that there wouldn't be any danger in this small town, as the robbers had cleaned up the surroundings. So they slacked off for a while. They didn't expect that the zombies didn't come, but there was a traitor. After slapping the two of them, Xiao Qing didn't intend to do anything else to them. She just called out the other 6 women. When the 6 women stood beside her, Xiao Qing said slowly, "When you decided to take them in, was it a unanimous decision? Speak." "Yes." Yan Pingshan and Yan Ru'er took the lead, and the others naturally followed. Xiao Qing continued to ask, "At that time, I should have said that if we took them in and took them to the Jiangbei superpower base, they wouldn't eat. They would help with some basic work, such as cooking and cleaning. At that time, I thought that you already knew clearly that they were our companions." Xiao Qing paused for a moment, swept her gaze around, and then said, "However, I never imagined that someone would actually do something worse than a beast. He snuck into their room in the middle of the night and did such a thing to a few women who had suffered all kinds of humiliation and suffering to the point of being delirious. Now that he is in my hands, I want to hear your opinions." The people below looked at each other. The girls were all filled with righteous indignation and wanted to be severely punished. However, there were a few discordant voices that came out. "He has already beaten and scolded. Why don't we punish him by deducting his reward for this trip? We are all brothers, so we have to consider our relationship." "That's right. He didn't do anything too excessive. At worst, he should apologize to these women and give them some compensation. It's normal to be impulsive after holding it in for so long. Men are all like this. It's not a big mistake. Just punish him." Chapter 102. The women lowered their heads, their bodies trembling, especially when someone proposed to compensate them, as if they were prostitutes. Xiaoqing dragged her voice and said, "Oh, is that what you all think?" When those people saw that Xiaoqing was not angry, they became a lot bolder and said, "Just give some compensation. At most, we can ask him to take out all his reward for this trip to compensate these women. With his reward for this trip, it won't be a problem for him to find dozens or hundreds of prostitutes." Before he finished, he was slapped by Yen Ruru. "What you just said, repeat it." That person instantly became silent, covered his face and said submissively, "Sister Yen, my mouth is cheap, please don't be angry." Yen Ruru could not wait to give him another kick to wake him up. Xiaoqing smiled slightly and raised her voice, "This is the decision you made. This is the way you decided to deal with it." The few people who were very active just now did not dare to speak. The remaining few girls said angrily, "Sister Xiao, don't be soft-hearted, punish him severely." Xiaoqing faintly said, "I really feel ashamed for you people. It turns out that the one who was humiliated wasn't your wife or daughter. If it was your wife or daughter who was humiliated like this, would you still say such things? You can't say it like that." Before one of them could say anything, he was kicked to the ground by Yen Ruru. Yen Ruru was completely angry. "Is that so? Then I will go back and let you feel the feeling of your wife being defiled. How about that?" Xiaoqing was not moved at all. She knew the nature of these people, so she was not disappointed. The arrival of the apocalypse had magnified many people's desires and indulged many people's temper. No matter what these people were like under other people's hands, in front of her, they had better be obedient. She was different from Meng Xin, Yen Pingxian, and Yen Ruru. She was ruthless enough to such people. Today, even if it was her partner who did such a thing, she would not tolerate it, let alone such a thing. Those who think that he should be given a lighter punishment can take a step forward. You can rest assured that even if you stand out, I will not retaliate against you." Xiaoqing said indifferently, "No matter what, at least you can rest assured of my reputation." There were whispers below. Some people who had a good relationship with this person braced themselves and stood out. When no one else stepped forward, Xiaoqing nodded. "I understand your opinions. Next, it's my way of dealing with it. If you have any opinions about my way of dealing with it, you can speak up." As soon as her voice fell, one person opened his mouth to speak, but before he could speak, he saw that the culprit who was hanging at the side was suddenly entangled by a group of vines. In only a second, the group of vines was like a meat grinder, turning a living person into minced meat. The process was so fast that he did not even have time to scream. Blood and minced meat splashed out, and coincidentally splashed on the face and mouth of the person who was about to speak. He was stunned, and after he recovered, he squatted on the ground and vomited. Xiaoqing's face was as calm as usual, as if the person who had just killed was not her. She smiled and asked kindly, "I have already dealt with it. If you have any opinions, you can say it." Those who stood in the front row were splashed with blood, and then as if they were infected by the vomiting person, they squatted on the ground and began to vomit. How could they have any opinions? How could they dare to have any opinions? Yen Ru couldn't bear it for a moment, but in the end, she hardened her heart. She knew that even if she were to punish them, it would only arouse these people's rebellious hearts. Instead, it was Xiaoqing who made an example out of them and used this bloody scene to suppress everyone. Chapter 103. The dead man had been her brother, and had ceased to be her brother the moment he had done that disgraceful deed. Yen Ruru would feel heartache, but she would not hate Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing took back the vines and looked lazily at the people who were vomiting and the pile of minced meat on the ground. She said softly, "If you have any opinions, remember to tell me. If you don't tell me, how will I know if you have any opinions? From now on, those with impure thoughts and dark thoughts who want to do something, you better hold back. You can go back and find whatever you want to vent." Stay here and be good. After all, I don't mind killing a few more people. At this moment, everyone looked at Xiaoqing in a completely different way. Other than fear, there was only fear. She was powerful, and her methods were ruthless. In the future, no one would dare to offend her. At this moment, they all understood one thing. They could be presumptuous in front of Yan Ruru because of Yan Ruru's loyalty. She would not do anything to them, so they were spoiled. They could be presumptuous in front of Yan Pingshan because Yan Pingshan was tolerant and gentle, so they were not afraid. However, they could not be presumptuous in front of Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing would not spoil any of them. In front of Xiaoqing, they only needed to be honest, obedient, and do what they should do. If there were some things that should not be done or could not be done, then they should not do it. Once they did it, the pile of minced meat under Xiaoqing's feet would be their end. Yan Ruru could not protect them, and neither could Yan Pingshan. Xiaoqing would not care about anyone's opinion. Alright, since no one has any objections, let's end this matter here. Everyone, eat or rest. We'll be on our way soon. Xiaoqing flicked the dust off her jacket. Xiang Ru took the initiative to find some tools to clean up the blood and flesh on the ground. She was very grateful to Xiaoqing. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Xiaoqing was very terrible, like a devil. In her eyes, Xiaoqing was the best one. Only Xiaoqing would stand up for these weak women who had no power and no use. Xiaoqing was cruel and killed people without blinking. So what? The men standing below, they were not so cruel, but what did they do? Gossiping and gossiping, using careless words to repeatedly tear their wounds open. Only Xiaoqing was willing to frighten so many paranormals for them. In Xiaoqing's eyes, they were human beings who needed to be respected and treated equally. There was no pity or sympathy in Xiaoqing's eyes. She just treated them like the most ordinary people, which made the women feel particularly at ease. The other three women were not willing to go back to Yan Ruru's side, but later they were persuaded by Xiang Ru. After all, after this incident, no one dared to bully Yan Ruru's people anymore. If all of them were on Xiaoqing's side, Xiaoqing would be under a lot of pressure. After dispersing, not many people had the appetite to eat. Anyone who had just seen a living person turned into minced meat and still had the appetite to eat was really as thick as an elephant's leg. Yan Ruru and several girls in Yan Pingshan's team all came forward to help Xiang Ru and the others clean up the minced meat on the ground and collect it to bury. After cleaning up, they also ate a little and were ready to set off. Xiaoqing didn't show any changes on the surface, but Yan Hanqing knew that she was very tired, so he took the initiative to take over her driving. From time to time, he glanced at Xiaoqing in the rearview mirror. She was resting in the back with her eyes closed, and there was a faint tiredness between her eyebrows. Chapter 104. It would be strange if Xiaoqing didn't notice it after seeing it so many times. She didn't open her eyes and asked in a low voice, "Hanqing, do you also think I'm too cruel and extreme?" Yan Hanqing shook his head. Xiaoqing's methods were indeed violent, but he didn't think Xiaoqing was wrong. He didn't even think that Xiaoqing's methods were too extreme. If he was the one doing it, he would also choose to kill the man, although he might use a more efficient method. But the result would be the same. After shaking his head, Yan Hanqing reacted. Xiaoqing's eyes were closed, so she couldn't see his movements. She said, "Scum, deserve to die." Xiaoqing, who was originally in a bad mood, was suddenly amused. She chuckled and said, "Can't you say more? Don't be angry. If it were me, I would also kill." Yan Hanqing thought for a while and said seriously. Finally, he added, "It's not comforting." "I know." Xiaoqing knew that the way she dealt with things was very violent, extreme, and even perverted, but she didn't want to change. In her eyes, there were three kinds of men in this world that couldn't be forgiven. The first was those who committed that kind of violence to women. The second was those who played with women's feelings. The third was those who committed domestic violence. Unfortunately, not only did that man hit the first one, but he also did that kind of thing to a woman who had suffered psychological and physical trauma. She really couldn't stand it. In fact, she had already suppressed her anger towards those who made sarcastic remarks. Otherwise, today's matter wouldn't have been so simple. I think I understand a lot of things. For example, in this apocalyptic world, strength is really the most important thing. Without strength, you can only be bullied. With strength, you can at least protect the people you want to protect. Xiao Qing yawned, and her mood was much better. Just like me, I think I'm upholding justice today, but some people think I'm very cruel. But even if my methods are cruel, no one dares to say anything because I have strength. Sleepy. If you're tired, you can sleep a little longer. Nothing should happen. I'll wake you up when it's time to rest. Yan Hanqing was silent for a moment, and then said. He had experienced the cruelty of the end of the world, so he had to admit that Xiao Qing was right. Xiao Qing nodded. She hugged Little Bun and rested her head on Erdai's thigh. She was not sleepy, but she felt tired. Xiao Qing slept until it was dark. She didn't even get up for lunch. Yan Hanqing and the others all knew that Xiao Qing didn't need to eat, so they didn't wake her up. It wasn't until the evening that Xiao Qing woke up naturally. Fortunately, the Erdai wasn't a human. Otherwise, her legs would have been numbed by the pillow, or even broken. When Xiao Qing got up, everyone was setting up the tents. When they saw Xiao Qing, they couldn't help but want to avoid her. It was because Xiao Qing had left too much psychological trauma in their hearts this morning. Xiao Qing didn't mind. She took Little Bun and Erdai to walk around, and then returned to their tent. Xiang Ru was helping Yan Hanqing set up the tent. Yan Hanqing skillfully set up the tent. He said that Xiang Ru was helping him, but in fact, she just handed him a few things. After the tent was set up, they began to cook. Xiao Qing smacked her lips. She suddenly felt like eating. Although she didn't need to eat at all, and even her sense of taste was weakened a lot, she was still a normal human being. Humans needed to eat. Even after absorbing the crystals, Xiao Qing would sometimes have the illusion that she was hungry. So most of the time, even if it was to hide, Xiao Qing would still eat a little. Erdai, let's go hunting. There was a mountain nearby. Although it was only a small mountain, there were definitely wild animals. Xiao Qing excitedly brought Erdai and Guchuan to hunt. Her and Guchuan's superpowers were very suitable for catching prey. One used vines, and the other used ice. Erdai was responsible for catching prey. Soon, the two of them caught a few wild rabbits, pheasants, and a mutated wild rabbit. It had red eyes, snow-white fur, and a pair of front teeth. It ran very fast. When the prey was brought back, most of them were slaughtered by Guchuan. Then, he skinned them, removed their internal organs, cleaned them, and prepared to cook. Only the buck-toothed rabbit with a pair of long, droopy ears escaped. Little Bun carried it away to play. Yes, he carried it away to play. Chapter 105. Gu Pan watched as Little Bun grabbed the rabbit's ear and swung it around. She felt pain for it, but this rabbit was quite smart. It knew that its life was in Xiao Qing's hands, so even if it was being swung around, it was still very obedient. Xiao Qing originally thought that if it had any strange movements, she would break its teeth, cut its nails, and give it to Little Bun to raise. Or she could just stew it and bring back an obedient animal. Unexpectedly, this rabbit was quite intelligent and behaved very obediently. Xiaoqing decided to let it go for now. "Alright, bring your baby rabbit over." Xiaoqing waved her hand. "It's time to eat. What do you want to eat? Rabbit leg or chicken leg?" Little Bun ran over with his short legs, carrying the rabbit. "Mama, it's not called baby rabbit. It's called Yaya." "Alright, Yaya." Xiaoqing glanced at the rabbit. Its front teeth were quite long. Her son's naming style was exactly the same as hers. "I want chicken leg." "Yaya, do you want chicken leg or rabbit leg?" Little Bun blinked his eyes and asked the rabbit in his hand very seriously. The rabbit was about to cry. It didn't want chicken leg or rabbit leg. It wanted to eat carrots. It only wanted carrots. It didn't want meat. It didn't want rabbit leg either. But seeing Little Bun's cute question, Xiaoqing's gaze was dark, as if she was considering where to skin it. It immediately lay flat and pretended to be dead. Then, it pitifully pointed at the chicken leg with its paw. No matter what, it couldn't eat its own kind, right? Xiaoqing handed Little Bun 2 chicken legs. Little Bun took one and looked at the rabbit worriedly. If he let go, the rabbit would run away. If he didn't let go, he couldn't give the other one to the rabbit. Xiaoqing calmly took out a thin vine. In order to make it look good, she even made a few white flowers bloom on the vine. Then, she wrapped the vine around the rabbit's neck like a collar. The other end of the vine wrapped around Little Bun's wrist. Little Bun immediately released his hand happily and took another drumstick to feed the rabbit. The rabbit named Jiyev lay on the ground in despair, its belly facing the sky. It allowed Little Bun to stuff the drumstick into its mouth. Its front teeth were sharp, and it could easily chew the drumstick together with the bones before swallowing it. In the beginning, the rabbit refused because it was a vegetarian rabbit. Its favorite food was vegetables and radishes. It could barely accept cabbage, but chicken drumsticks were not in its diet. It wasn't until it was forced to eat a drumstick that it realized that there was a food in this world that radishes couldn't compare to. Thus, the rabbit gnawed off 2 drumsticks, a wing, and a few chicken butts. Then, it rolled on the ground as if it hadn't had enough. Of course, this was because it was no longer a normal rabbit. If a normal rabbit ate so much meat, it would have vomited and had diarrhea, half dead. As for a mutated rabbit, its body had evolved in all aspects. Although it was destined to not be able to beat those large mutated animals because of its starting point, eating some meat was a small matter. After feeding the rabbit, Little Bun was very happy. He held the rabbit's hand and ran around. The rabbit, which had just felt that it was living a happy life, was suddenly dragged and rolled around, almost knocking its front teeth out. When Little Bun came back from walking the rabbit's fur was already falling out pitifully. Even Xiaoqing couldn't bear to see it. When it was time to sleep, Little Bun heartlessly abandoned Xiaoqing and insisted on hugging the rabbit to sleep. Xiaoqing was worried that Little Bun would be bitten by the rabbit, so she could only watch from the side all night. Chapter 106. When Little Bun fell asleep, Xiaoqing took the rabbit out of Little Bun's arms. Then, she took out a zombie crystal of the lowest level and fed it to the rabbit. The rabbit was originally in a daze when it felt something slide down its throat. Following that, there was an explosion of energy in its body, causing its small body to swell up in an instant. Then, soft fur slowly grew out, and shortened but sharper teeth. The rabbit was a little dumbfounded. It jumped on the spot, looking very stupid. Xiaoqing patted its head. Her voice was faint but very gentle. "Stay by my son's side obediently. In the future, I will let you continue to upgrade. If you dare to run away or hurt my son, I will turn you into a braised rabbit head." The rabbit couldn't understand human language, but that didn't stop it from understanding Xiaoqing's meaning. It was so scared that it immediately lay down, revealing its snow-white belly to show its submission. Xiaoqing patted its belly. If it wasn't necessary, she wouldn't pull out the rabbit's teeth or cut off its sharp nails. Even if the rabbit was obedient, she would give it some benefits. Who asked her son to like it? And if it was trained well, this little rabbit might even be able to protect her son. It was killing two birds with one stone. The rabbit wasn't stupid. Other animals mutated in their bodies, becoming stronger and stronger, with sharp claws and teeth, increasing movement speed, and many times more strength than before. Only this rabbit was different. It mutated in its brain. Just like adding points in online games, it added all the points to wisdom. Therefore, this weakling rabbit was probably the smartest of all the rabbits. This smart rabbit quickly understood Xiaoqing's idea and was willing to accept it. It was the weakest among the mutated animals. It could be said that it was at the bottom of the food chain. All carnivores could take a bite out of it. It was better to be raised by Xiaoqing. It was safe and could increase its strength. If Little Bun could be gentler to it, that would be even better. Xiaoqing was very satisfied with the rabbit's cooperation. She stuffed the rabbit into Little Bun's arms and fell asleep. Dai naturally reached out and pulled Xiaoqing into his arms. Habit was a terrible thing. Just like in the beginning, Xiaoqing was very reluctant to let Dai sleep in her bed. After Dai pestered her for so long, she was now used to it. Although she couldn't feel the warmth, Xiaoqing still pulled the quilt over her and Dai before falling asleep. In fact, for most of the night, even with her eyes closed, she was still conscious. This was the benefit of this body. It was both a benefit and a disadvantage. Although she didn't need much rest, in the long night, she would recall too many things. In the past, what she recalled the most was that fake scum and the moment when the speeding car hit her. Xiaoqing used to hate everyone. Those passers-by, who looked at her indifferently, but no one reached out to help her. If someone had been willing to save her, the child in her stomach might not have died. Little Bun wouldn't have become like this. He would always have a child's body and intelligence. He couldn't eat like a normal person and live like a normal person. Even if he looked like a normal child, he didn't have a heartbeat. Even the little blood in his body was cold. If Little Bun wasn't alive, Xiaoqing might be destroying the world right now. It was probably this experience that made her more extreme and more ruthless than normal people. Chapter 107. Now, in the long night, when she was not in the mood to sleep, she was thinking more about the warm days when everyone was together. Xiaoqing changed Yan Hanqing and the others, and Yan Hanqing and the others also changed Xiaoqing. Dai stretched out his hands and feet and tightly imprisoned Xiaoqing in his arms. Xiaoqing sighed and indulged Dai. Ever since Xiaoqing executed that man in front of everyone that day, many people looked at her with fear in their eyes. However, no one dared to bully those women anymore. Xiaoqing did not care about their gazes. She still lived her life as usual, and the journey was relatively smooth. After walking for more than 10 days, they were finally close to the Jiangbei survivor base. We will reach the Jiangbei survivor base in at most 2 days. Yan Pingshan's words were full of suppressed excitement. Once they reached the Jiangbei survivor base, it meant that they were safe, and the things they transported back were also safe. We can't relax, there is still a fierce battle ahead. Xiaoqing was not so optimistic. She sat next to the fire and carefully looked at the map, and then pointed to it. In front of us is all plains. Because of the flat terrain, there are many towns, not to mention the small towns. On the way there is a city, and we can't go around it. If we choose to go around it, we may have to turn to the northwest, then pass through 2 mountains, and then turn back. After passing through Yanjiang, we can bypass this city and reach the Jiangbei survivor base. Meng Shen nodded. When we came here, we passed through this city. Almost all of the injured people were injured at that time. The city has not been cleaned up, and there are a lot of zombies. Most of the zombies have evolved, and it is very difficult to deal with. So now is not the time to relax. Let's take a break and be alert when the time comes. Yen Ruru also agreed. Many people died when they lost their vigilance, and she did not want her teammates to make such a mistake. After all, this was a fatal mistake. If there is a way to avoid places where there are more zombies, it will be much easier. Yen Pingshen muttered. Xiao Qing didn't speak, and didn't want to be the first bird. She just opened the map and looked carefully. The places with the most zombies were none other than those schools, large shopping malls, large factories, and so on. As long as they avoided these places, they shouldn't encounter too many problems. After all, there were many of them this time. Even if they encountered some small problems, it would be easy to deal with. If they encountered any big problems, it wouldn't be very dangerous in front of so many paranormals. After walking for another half a day, they finally passed through a small town and arrived at the city. This city should have been a very prosperous city. Because it was located on the main road, and behind it was the Yan River, water transportation was very convenient, so the business here should have developed very well. The population of a bustling city was usually denser. Think about S City, then think about the capital. Before the apocalypse, there were traffic jams every day. After the apocalypse, these cities were also the places with the most zombies. Although the Jiangbei survivor base was established in Jiangbei, we have not sent any paranormals to clean up this city. However, we arranged a search and rescue team to search for survivors. After searching for half a month, we brought all the survivors to the Jiangbei survivor base. At that time, our people found that the zombies in this city were evolving very fast. When we rushed to the Jiangbei survivor base in S City, there were already a lot of level 3 zombies. That's why so many people were injured, and now we don't know the situation inside. Yen Pingshen explained carefully. He didn't intend to hide anything. There was no benefit in hiding, and it would hurt everyone. Chapter 108. Xiao Qing could not help but frown. In other words, we will face more unknown dangers. Yen Pingshen nodded and then said, so I mean, if you think it is dangerous, we can choose to take a detour. Although it will take longer, and we have to pass through 2 mountains, the danger should be less than going through the city. Yen Rurug shook his head first. We know the danger in the city, but the danger in the mountains is unknown. Those evolved animals are more dangerous than zombies. My personal suggestion is that we go through the city, at least you have experience in this aspect. The unknown is always more terrible than the known. I also suggest going through the city. As soon as Yen Ruru spoke, Yen Pingshen's team leader also spoke. Meng Shen did not make a decision rashly, but asked Xiao Qing, what do you think? I have no opinion. Xiao Qing said perfunctorily, and then began to study the map. In fact, she personally preferred to take a detour, but Yen Ruru and Yen Pingshen's attitude was very clear. She did not want to say her opinion and put them in a dilemma. Anyway, no matter which way they went, the danger would not be small. The apocalypse was like this. For most people, the safest place was probably the survivor base. Leaving the survivor base, the outside world was full of danger. From the apocalypse until now, the number of human beings had decreased by 2/3. Most of them had become zombies, and some of them had died in the hands of their own people. In other words, the number of zombies was much higher than that of humans. It had to be said that this was a very sad conclusion. Moreover, the number of humans was still slowly decreasing. After all, hiding in the survivor base was not completely safe, and they had to go out regularly to find food, fuel, and clean up the zombies near the base. Especially ordinary people, the casualty rate of ordinary people in the apocalypse was particularly high. Zombies liked to eat them, and paranormals felt that they were superior and could humiliate them. In short, ordinary people were the biggest vulnerable group in the apocalypse, the kind that anyone could bully. More importantly, the birth rate was rapidly decreasing. In this era where there was no way to guarantee one's own life, only powerful people would be willing to have children. Even if ordinary people had children, they could not afford to raise them or even give birth to them. If it went on like this, perhaps human beings would slowly become extinct, just like the dinosaurs during the Ice Age. Then, many years later, other creatures would be born on Earth, just like how we look at the dinosaur fossils of the past. They would find things left behind by humans, and call them antiques and relics. What are you thinking? Yan Hanqing's voice was a little low, but it was exceptionally steady. He sat beside Xiaoqing, which woke Xiaoqing from her thoughts. Xiao looked up, and saw that Yan Pingshen and the others had already prepared things. I am thinking whether human beings will become extinct. After Xiaoqing finished speaking, she laughed to herself. Now that I think about it, even if it goes extinct, it will be a long time in the future. After I die, who cares about the flood? No, it won't. Yan Hanqing did not feel that this topic was strange at all, and said seriously, human beings are different from those extinct species. When they are in a desperate situation, human beings will use all their strength, and even burst out more strength, to survive. Even if we become extinct, like you said, it will be a long time after we die. I rarely hear you say such a long sentence. Xiaoqing could not help but laugh. She called the little bun over and held him in her arms, and then the possessive air Dai hugged Xiaoqing from behind. Chapter 109. Yan Hanqing's eyes darkened. I'm not good with words, but there are always exceptions. For example, when facing the person he liked. Xiaoqing hugged Xiao Bao, and Xiao Bao carried the rabbit. Leaning back, she was in Air Dai's arms. She looked at the sky lazily, and then asked herself, will the apocalypse end one day? Yan Hanqing thought for a moment, then said, they will. I heard that some bases have already started to develop antidotes to resist the zombie virus. If this continues, they might be able to develop antidotes to turn zombies back into humans. I hope so. Xiaoqing stretched her body. When she stretched her body, she leaned on Air Dai. Air Dai was rubbed by her, and his entire zombie body was aroused. However, a certain key part of his body became a decoration after that day. The most painful thing for a man was to have a beautiful woman in his arms, but not have the ability to sleep with her. It was the same for male zombies. If the apocalypse ends, I want to buy a house near the sea. I like the feeling of facing the sea. My whole body seems to be relaxed with the widening of my horizons. I want to send Bao Bao to the best kindergarten. If Air Dai can be cured, that would be the best. I can help him find his family and send him back to them. Xiaoqing murmured in Air Dai's arms. She smiled as she talked. That was the life she wanted but couldn't have. Yan Hanqing opened his mouth, but in the end, he couldn't say those two words. What about me? Xiaoqing probably didn't think about his place. After all, he was an adult. No matter what, he didn't need others to worry about him. At least he wouldn't starve to death. I'm thinking too much. Xiaoqing rubbed her head and said to Yan Hanqing, let's pack up and prepare. When we reach that city, we may face a lot of dangers. Yan Hanqing nodded. His feelings for Xiaoqing had deepened as he got along with her day by day, but he had never had the urge to say it out loud. Yan Hanqing felt that he didn't have that qualification. Moreover, Dai was lucky enough to get Xiaoqing's approval first. He just wanted to be her solid shield, and help her build a stable back. Then, when she was fighting in the front, she could trust him with her back. Or let him be her shield. No matter what, to use a cliché phrase from a TV series, it was fine as long as she was happy. On the other side, Gu Panpan was scolding Gu Chuan, "Brother, can't you say more? Will you die if you say more?" Gu Chuan squatted on the ground to pack up. He was silent. Unlike Yan Hanqing was clumsy and didn't want to talk. After listening to Gu Panpan's complaints, Gu Chuan didn't say anything. He did what he should do and was very calm. Gu Panpan was infuriated. She looked at Xiaoqing's side and said resentfully, "Just keep it to yourself. Keep it to yourself. Don't tell anyone what you're thinking. Just watch as Sister Qing runs off with another man, then cry under the covers." Gu Chuan refuted seriously, "I won't cry. I will only bless her." Gu Panpan was so angry that she laughed. She kept saying that Gu Chuan was useless. Although she and Gu Chuan were not twins, they were born from the same mother. After living together for so many years, how could she not see through Gu Chuan's thoughts? Gu Chuan had a good impression of Xiaoqing, and it was getting better every day. Gu Panpan saw it. More importantly, Gu Panpan also liked Xiaoqing. If it was another woman who became her sister-in-law, Gu Panpan might be picky. But if it was Xiaoqing, she would only cheer. It was a pity that this brother of hers was a taciturn gourd. He kept everything in his heart and never said anything. He never tried to curry favor with her. How could he get a girl like this? Thinking back, Gu Chuan was very handsome and was very popular in school. Although he was an iceberg with a poker face, there were always some girls who could withstand the cold air. They were conquered by his appearance and pursued him. Later, they were all chased away by him. Gu Panpan couldn't help but roll her eyes and say, "Just keep it to yourself. You are destined to be alone." Gu Chuan didn't care about what Gu Panpan said. He was a person who wasn't good at expressing his feelings. In addition, he didn't like to talk. It was normal that he couldn't get a girl to like him. As for Xiaoqing, Gu Chuan never let Gu Panpan know. He didn't express it not because he was shy or anything else, but because he was afraid. It was like a person who knew that he would definitely be rejected, so he would rather maintain the current relationship. It was better to go from being friends to being in an awkward relationship. Gu Panpan said that he was a person with a strong heart. But in front of Xiaoqing, he was so cowardly. Chapter 110. Before entering the city, Xiaoqing had told the girls not to get out of the car no matter what happened. Xiaoqing was the weakest one among them, except for Little Bun, so Xiaotong had arranged for Xiaotong to protect them. When everything was ready, they entered the city. The situation in the city was better than they had imagined. Many zombies wandered out of the city to look for food, and some wandered around the edge of the city. After entering the city, they didn't encounter as many zombies as they had imagined. Several people with fire and earth powers stood on the roof of the car to clear the way and clear the zombies blocking the way. Some evolved zombies were very fierce. They directly jumped on the car, but were bounced off by the protective cover of the people with water powers. Of course, there were also some particularly fierce ones. They almost jumped on one of the people with superpowers. Xiaoqing reacted quickly. She shot out a vine, wrapped it around the zombie's leg, and pulled it back. That zombie took advantage of the chaos and ran away among the other zombies. Zombies were getting smarter and smarter. If they continued to develop like this, it was absolutely not impossible for them to have the same intelligence as ordinary people. In the beginning, those zombies were slow and weak. As long as ordinary people had a weapon in their hands, even if it was a wooden stick, they could kill a lot of zombies. Now, the zombies' body toughness, movement speed, and attack power had all increased a lot. This trip is particularly easy. Yan Pingshan stuck his head out of the window and said to Xiao Qing with a smile, "I thought we would have to fight a hard battle before we could leave, but looking at the current situation, it will be a lot easier for us." Xiao Qing didn't say anything. She looked at the few zombies on the street and felt a little uneasy. She always felt that there was a pair of eyes in the dark watching them. Those eyes were full of malice, which made her feel scared. After a moment of silence, Xiao Qing asked Dai, "Do you feel the breath of your own kind?" Xiao Qing was not a complete zombie, but Dai was. He could sense many things that Xiao Qing could not. For example, he could sense powerful zombies within a certain range. After Xiao Qing asked, Dai began to sense his surroundings seriously. After a long time, he nodded and shook his head. Then, he looked at Xiao Qing in confusion. Xiao Qing could roughly understand what he was trying to say. Dai wanted to express that he could sense that there were many of his kind around, and there was also a powerful force that belonged to his kind. However, that force was vague and could not be sensed clearly. Sometimes, it would even disappear. That was why Dai was unsure. Xiao Qing vaguely felt the danger. She couldn't help but remind Yan Pingshan, "Don't relax. I always feel that something is wrong." Yan Pingshan frowned. The situation was too smooth, which made him feel a little uneasy. So, he called Meng Shen. Meng Shen's ability was completely different from Xiao Tong's. He was good at detection and crisis sensing. Meng Shen's body was very weak. Even if he awakened his ability, he was not as good as some ordinary people. Because he was in the research institute all year round, radiation, overwork, and overuse of his spirit, his physical fitness was particularly poor. Even using his ability would bring him a lot of burden. So, even if he had the ability, Meng Shen rarely used it. Only when he was researching, he would use his spirit to assist. After listening to Yan Pingshan's words, Meng Shen carefully used his spirit to sense the surroundings. He found that there were zombies around, but there were very few zombies on the road they were traveling on. Chapter 111. He could only sense that there were still a lot of zombies nearby, but he didn't find anything else. After telling Yan Pingshan about this discovery, Meng Shen thought for a moment, got out of the car, and went to find Xiao Qing. When Xiao Qing was hesitating, Meng Shen came over. Xiao Qing let Meng Shen get in the car. What's the matter?" Meng Shen told her about his discovery, and then asked, "Did you find anything?" "Since you reminded me, I vaguely feel that something is wrong. I just feel a little uneasy in my heart." Xiao Qing thought for a moment. Dai couldn't be exposed, so she said lightly, "I always feel that there is something secretly spying on us. Let's go a little further, we are almost a quarter of the way there." Meng Shen gritted his teeth and said, "When we came here, there was no big danger, only one time when we passed by a shopping mall, the people below were greedy, so they went in to search for supplies, but they encountered a lot of zombies. Some people were injured, so this time we will take a detour, there shouldn't be any big danger." "Okay." Xiao Qing responded, but her heart was heavy. Her sixth sense had always been very accurate, and it was also her sixth sense that saved her many times. The more they went forward, the more danger Xiao Qing felt. The degree of danger even made her want to take her people back, even if she had to give up this mission, even if they were not far from the destination. This kind of impulse was slowly fermenting in Xiao Qing's heart, and in the end, it was out of control, and became impossible to suppress. But even to this extent, Xiaoqing didn't choose to leave. She knew that as long as she said something, Gu Panpan and the others would support her without asking for any reason, and leave with her, even if the hardships along the way would be in vain. What about Meng Shen and the others? Meng Shen and Yan Ruru's team was different from Xiaoqing's team. In Xiaoqing's team, it could be said that Xiaoqing had the final say. From Yan Hanqing to Gu Chuan and his sister, they all had full trust in her, not to mention Dai and the others. As for Yan Ruru's team, they did not have the final say. Such an important decision could not be made in a few minutes. Not to mention whether Xiaoqing's proposal would be approved. Even if they could agree to Xiaoqing's proposal and leave the city, they would have wasted enough time. But Xiaoqing had no other choice. She could only look for Yan Pingshan and Yan Ruru to tell them her thoughts and decision. Yan Ruru was stunned. We can leave this city in one more day. My suggestion is to leave. Xiaoqing didn't say much. Yan Ruru frowned and said, with the time we have to leave, we can definitely pass through this city. Yan Pingshan thought more than Yan Ruru. First, we don't know if there is any danger in passing through this city. So far, we only know that you can sense it. We can't use this reason to convince everyone. If I give the order now and tell my people to leave this city and take a detour, 99% of them will definitely oppose it. Second, Qing, you should also know that many people in our teams have misunderstood you. As long as you make the suggestion, some people might do it on purpose, so let's talk about the result. Xiaoqing said indifferently. She seemed to not care about anything. Even her expression was always a faint smile, a faint anger, or an expressionless face. Many people would think that she was cold and unapproachable, and then retreat. However, Yan Pingshan knew that Xiaoqing had her unique iron-blooded gentleness. It was just that this gentleness was only for people she approved of. For outsiders, she was iron-blooded. Chapter 112. Perhaps they had already been drawn into the approved circle, which was why Xiaoqing had the patience to hate him until now. Yan Pingshan gritted his teeth and said, but I believe you. I will bring up this suggestion and see what they say. Meng Shen nodded, I will try to persuade them. Yan Ruru paced back and forth and finally gritted his teeth, I can only try. I can't guarantee that I can persuade them. Xiaoqing's heart was actually quite warm. After all, they were willing to trust her and make such a decision without any evidence to prove that there would be fatal danger ahead. This showed that she wasn't a failure as a person. It was time for lunch break. Yan Pingshan and Yan Ruru gathered their subordinates and told them about the matter. As expected, everyone was surprised by this decision. Why do we suddenly want to go back? Just because someone sensed danger. Where is there no danger in the apocalypse? Won't there be danger if we take a detour? I think we should speed up and go through this city. It will be safer. That's right. Just because of an inexplicable premonition, we have to retreat and take a detour. We have been walking for almost a day. Isn't it superfluous if we retreat and take a detour? I think so too. Where is there no danger? I feel danger all the time. Does that mean it's better for me to stay in the base and not go anywhere? Listening to the dispute below, Xiaoqing had a hunch that this would happen, so she was not disappointed. Yan Pingshan and others looked at Xiaoqing helplessly. Immediately, someone whispered, I was wondering who suggested it. So it was her. She is quite capable when facing her own people. Now that she feels danger, she wants to go back and take a detour. After that, many people secretly looked at Xiaoqing, afraid that she would suddenly kill people. Later, they found that Xiaoqing didn't mean that, so they became bolder and couldn't help but say. That's right. I didn't see her do anything when she was killing her own people. Why is she scared now? If you want to take a detour, do it yourself. Their dissatisfaction was vented out as they whispered louder and louder. Xiaoqing didn't care. She just whispered to Yan Ruru, "Leave those women to me first. I'll take them away first. If anything happens, with their physiques, I'm afraid they'll be the first to." Yan Ruru hesitated for a moment before asking, "Are you leaving?" Xiaoqing nodded and looked at Gu Panpan and the others with a very gentle gaze. "I don't want anything to happen to my friends, so I don't want to take them with me anymore. I will send them out of this city and find a safe place to settle down first. Then I will come back to catch up with you until you pass through this city. Then I will go back and take them to the Jiangbei survivor base to settle down these girls before returning to S City." Yan Pingshan was the first to disagree. He specially called Xiaoqing and used all kinds of methods. Why? Wasn't it to get the information about the water purification from Xiaoqing? If Xiaoqing were to leave, all their efforts would be in vain. Yan Pingshan tried to persuade Xiaoqing to stay, but Xiaoqing said firmly, "I have to send them out. I don't want a penny of the reward this time. I will give you the crystal nuclei in advance when I come back." Yan Pingshan was a little angry. "I don't care about the reward or the crystal nuclei. If you really want to send them out, I won't stop you." Chapter 113. "Okay, I will be back." Xiaoqing and Yan Pingshan exchanged the serial number of the signal transmitter. "Call me if you need anything." This signal transmitter was developed after Doomsday. It was very similar to a mobile phone. The only difference was that it was powered by a crystal nucleus instead of electricity. Moreover, it had a range. There was a signal tower in the base. Only within the range of the signal tower could it be used. Also, it could only send text messages, and could not receive voice messages. After explaining a little, Xiaoqing said goodbye to Yan Ruru and left with the girls. Gu Panpan and the others didn't even ask why. They were all angry when those people snickered. "Who are those people?" "Sister Qing, you shouldn't have reminded them." Gu Panpan said angrily with her eyes wide open. "Okay, let's hurry up. I remember there's a bank on the edge of the city. The security there is pretty good. I'll put you guys down there and then go back to help Mengshin." Xiaoqing stepped on the gas pedal and sped all the way. Occasionally there were zombies in the way, but they were all sent flying. "What? Sister Qing, you still want to go back?" "No. Let's go back to the S City survivor base. Don't worry about them. They can do whatever they want." The more Gu Panpan spoke, the angrier she became. She really couldn't stand that group of people. From the beginning, when the girls were bullied and Xiaoqing punished the culprit, Gu Panpan already hated them when they were still gossiping. Why did the girls deserve to be bullied? Why did the weak deserve to be inferior to others? That bastard was a human life, but these girls weren't. They were all a group of bastards. Since we have accepted this mission, we must escort them to the end. Xiaoqing hit another zombie and sent it flying. Yan Hanqing, who was driving at the back, almost couldn't keep up with Xiaoqing. "You know my strength, so you don't have to worry. I'll come back after I escort them to their destination." After Xiaoqing finished speaking, Dai came out from the middle and hugged Xiaoqing's waist, expressing his determination to follow Xiaoqing no matter what. "There's still Dai, so we'll definitely be fine." Xiaoqing reached out a hand to touch Dai's head, comforting him, and then said, "A person must have a bottom line. If he didn't have a bottom line, he wouldn't even be qualified to be a human." Xiaoqing also had her own bottom line. Just like this time, even though she knew that she would encounter danger, she still went back and settled down her companions. She was not stupid, this was a kind of persistence. Gu Pan wanted to say something, but under Xiao Qing's determined eyes, she couldn't say anything. Because she also had her own persistence, so she could understand Xiao Qing. After a long time, Gu Pan clenched her fist and said, "No matter what, you have to take care of your own safety. If you really encounter a big danger, then, as long as you come back safely, you don't have to care about too many people. Anyway, they are not good people. I know, we will be a burden if we go with you, and we will make you worry. So we will wait for you outside. If you don't come out after a long time, we will go in and look for you." Xiao Qing nodded and agreed. Although Gu Pan knew that Xiao Qing was comforting her, she still felt relieved. She leaned against the seat and muttered to herself, "I'm still too weak. If she was strong enough, she would have a reason to follow Xiao Qing. No matter where they went, at least she wouldn't be a burden." She believed that her brother and Yan Hanqing also thought so. No one was willing to see Xiao Qing fight alone. If they were forced to accept it, they would feel very uncomfortable. Chapter 114. Xiao Qing's speed was very fast. Before the sun had even set, she had already brought her friends to their destination. It was still within the city limits, but it was a small bank in a relatively remote area. There were only 2 zombies in uniform in the bank, so they were easily cleaned up. Xiao Qing left all the food behind, and then told them to close the door and wait inside. Xiao Qing was forced to promise that she would use the signal transmitter to send back messages every day. If she didn't send back any message after a day, Yan Hanqing and the others would enter the city to find her. After they agreed, Xiao Qing took Air Dai, kissed Little Bun who insisted on following them, and returned to the city. She and Air Dai weren't worried about being attacked by zombies at night, and they had endless energy, so they directly walked at night. With their speed, if nothing unexpected happened, they should be able to catch up with Yan Pingshan and the others before noon tomorrow. On the other side, Yan Pingshan and Yan Ruru's subordinates were all cheering. They finally got rid of Xiao Qing, that demon. Although Xiao Qing said that she would come back, it didn't affect their good mood. There were even a lot of people secretly praying that Xiao Qing would die on the way back. In short, she wouldn't come back to torment them. Yan Pingshan was very helpless. He could make his subordinates listen to his orders, but he couldn't change their minds. Most people in this world are stupid, just like them. Meng Shan coldly looked at those people. He had a good premonition, and the more he walked, the more he felt danger. If there was one person in this group who believed Xiao Qing's words the most, it was none other than him. So looking at this group of people, he felt very helpless. If you really encounter any danger, you should try to escape. You still have a wife, and she is waiting for you to come home. Also, I promised Uncle to take care of you. Meng Shan said softly. What nonsense are you talking about? Yan Pingshan's face was also a little ugly. He pursed his lips and said in a low voice, "It'll be fine. Even if it's a little dangerous, it won't be a big problem. We'll definitely be able to return to the Jiangbei survivor base safely." Meng Shan didn't say anything more. He just lay in the car and closed his eyes to rest. He had to recharge his energy. If he really encountered danger, he might be able to protect Yan Pingshan. After all, Yan Pingshan's special ability was too weak. It was basically no different from having no special ability. Yan Pingshan was also a wood paranormal, but he was different from Xiao Qing. He was much weaker than Xiao Qing, especially when he was compared with her. After all, Xiao Qing's fighting ability was in everyone's eyes. As for Yan Pingshan, he could only make the seeds sprout. So usually, his special ability was used to help Meng Shan study how to make plants from other places grow in the Jiangbei survivor base. Then there was nothing. What was the use of making the seed sprout? Was he going to use it to scare the zombies? Xiaoqing and Air Dai were running very fast. They almost didn't have time to rest, especially Xiaoqing, who was driving. She unloaded everything in the car, so the car was even faster when empty. In addition, she drove very fast. If the person in the car wasn't Air Dai, he might have been scared to death by her driving. Xiaoqing was running so fast for a reason. She was really worried that Yan Pingshan and the others would encounter any danger. The more worried you were, the more likely it was to happen. When Xiaoqing was about to return to her previous location, she suddenly received a message from Yan Pingshan. It was only a few words: "Don't go back to the city." She replied to the message and didn't get an answer. The optimistic thought was that Yan Pingshan and the others had already left the city and arrived at the river safely. They were preparing to cross the river. The pessimistic thought was that Yan Pingshan and the others had encountered a fatal danger. They were worried that Xiaoqing would come back and be involved in danger, so they notified her. If it was the former, Xiaoqing replied to the message, they would definitely reply. However, there was no reply so far. It was very likely that it was the latter. Xiaoqing was a little anxious at that time. She tried to locate Yan Pingshan's location but failed. She immediately asked Air Dai, "Where are the most zombies now?" Air Dai was stunned and pointed in a direction. That was the direction he felt the strongest energy fluctuation. Xiaoqing stepped on the gas and rushed over. She hoped that Yan Pingshan and the others were still okay. It seemed that her premonition was very likely to be true. This city was indeed more dangerous than everyone thought. It seemed that there was something secretly controlling most of the zombies in the city. If it was true, Yan Pingshan and the others were afraid. Chapter 115. Falling from a high place, Yan Pingshan couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. If it wasn't for Meng Shan protecting him, he might have been torn to shreds by now. What he had to do now was to seek for help. But where would he go to find help? The Jiangbei survivor base was still some distance away from here. By the time he found help, Meng Shan and the others might already be. Yan Pingshan didn't think of going to find Xiaoqing, but what would he do after finding her? Would he let Xiaoqing accompany him to die? Yan Pingshan tried his best to support his body and staggered forward. He regretted it. He should have persuaded everyone at that time. No. He should have been tougher at that time and listened to Xiaoqing. Even if someone opposed, he should have forcibly withdrawn. Then, the current situation wouldn't have happened. Yan Pingshan was already trying his best, but even though he was limping forward, the zombies were as agile as monkeys. They quickly caught up with him. Yan Pingshan was in despair. He would probably be eaten by the zombies bite by bite. The people trapped there would also be eaten by the zombies because they couldn't hold on. Regret was completely useless. A zombie threw itself at Yan Pingshan and bit his neck. Yan Pingshan's eyes became fierce when he felt the sharp pain. He grabbed the dagger at his waist and stabbed it into the zombie's head through its eyes. Even so, the zombie didn't let go. Yan Pingshan pushed the zombie's body away. The piece of flesh that was bitten was immediately torn off. Blood gushed out like a fountain. He groaned and rolled forward to avoid another zombie. His eyes were filled with despair. Even if he died, he would drag a few zombies down with him. The other zombies that were chasing after them had also caught up. It was said that when humans were in danger, they would burst forth with abilities that exceeded their limits. Yan Pingshan had personally proven this point. His ability was useless, and he had relied purely on his weak physical strength to kill 2 zombies. However, he was already exhausted by this point. His body was covered in wounds left behind by the zombies. He lay on the ground, gasping for breath. He didn't even have the strength to move a finger. The remaining zombies all pounced on him, biting his flesh piece by piece. In addition to the pain, there was more despair. But at this time, Yan Pingshan vaguely heard a scream. Then, several green vines swept over like a whip. The few zombies that were lying on top of him were all swept away. Then, a flexible figure fell from the sky. Its sharp claws easily tore apart a zombie that was chasing him. This figure was very fast. It's running like a phantom. Soon, it cleaned up the few zombies chasing him. Are you okay? Xiao Qing parked the car beside Yan Pingshan. She got out of the car to check on Yan Pingshan's injuries. There were many scratches and bites on his body. Although they weren't fatal, they were bleeding, which was very troublesome. If the bleeding wasn't stopped in time and the wounds were bandaged, excessive bleeding could kill him. Moreover, the wounds that were bitten by zombies would be covered with corpse poison. Although paranormals wouldn't be infected by corpse poison, it would still make it difficult to stop the bleeding. Bear with it. Xiao Qing took out a dagger and stripped Yan Pingshan. Yan Pingshan was a little ashamed, but more anxious. He grabbed Xiao Qing's hand and hurriedly said, leave this city. There's a zombie here that we don't know its specific level. It can command the zombies in the whole city. Then it set a trap for everyone. Go, before it finds out, leave quickly. Chapter 116. Xiao Qing didn't pay attention to him. She just took the dagger and cut off the flesh near the deep wound. Yan Pingshan was in so much pain that he kept gasping. After cutting off the infected flesh, Xiao Qing took out the anti-inflammatory and hemostatic capsule. She opened it and sprinkled the powder on Yan Pingshan's wound. Yan Pingshan was in so much pain that he kept pinching Xiao Qing's wrist. When Xiao Qing finished bandaging him, he let go. Xiao Qing's wrist had a clear red 5-finger mark. I'm sorry. Yan Pingshan's voice was hoarse with a deep apology. Xiao Qing didn't care. She just asked him, you said you were surrounded. Where are they? Are they okay? A lot of people died. Yan Pingshan said in pain. In the end, a few brothers volunteered to cover the retreat. We rushed out a bloody path. We are currently trapped in a building. Xiao Qing, let's go find reinforcements. Do you think this is realistic? Xiao Qing helped him gather his clothes and said calmly. Yan Pingshan grabbed his hair in agony and growled in a low voice, it's all my fault. It's all my fault. If I had been more resolute back then and ignored their objections and went back the way we came, things wouldn't have turned out this way, Xiao Qing said lightly, it's not your fault. In that kind of situation, no one would give up on passing through the city and then go back the way they came. People are like this. Only when they suffer losses and suffer will they know that they can't just look at what's in front of them. Only then will they regret. If Yan Pingshan really chose to force them to go back the way they came, those people would definitely rebel. So from the beginning, Xiao Qing knew that her proposal would never pass. The reason why she brought it up was out of a sense of responsibility. Just like some things, you know that you will fail, but not doing it and not doing it are two different things. At least she had tried her best, so she had a clear conscience. Yan Pingshan was very ashamed, because he knew that what Xiao Qing said would happen. Seeing Yan Pingshan like this, Xiao Qing said, I'll ask Dai to send you out. You go and find the reinforcements. Where are they? I'll go and see if I can delay them. Yan Pingshan already felt very guilty. How could he let Xiao Qing take the risk? He shook his head forcefully. Let's go find reinforcements together. You can't go alone. The longer we delay, the more dangerous they will be. Are you sure you want to waste time with me? Xiao Qing was not moved at all. He said coldly. Yan Pingshan gritted his teeth and pulled Xiao Qing. I don't want anything to happen to Mengshen and the others, but you are also my friend. I don't want you to die. Tell me, where are they? If you don't tell me, they might really. Xiao Qing was very determined. Yan Pingshen was about to collapse. He sat blankly for a second, then lowered his head and pointed in a direction. There's a hospital there, the very tall one. Xiao Qing nodded and called Dai over. Dai, send him back. Send him to where Qing and the others are. Dumbo widened his eyes and then slowly took a step back, expressing his intention that he didn't want to leave Xiao Qing's side. Yan Pingshen was already very guilty. Seeing this, he immediately said, I can go by myself. Can you find a place? Xiao Qing rolled her eyes at him. Yan Pingshen quickly said, I won't go back to the outside of the city. I want to go through the city to get reinforcements. If I'm alone, the target will be smaller. It shouldn't be a problem. Xiao Qing had no choice but to let Dai squeeze out a drop of blood and smear it on Yan Pingshen's body. Zombies were similar to corpses. The blood in their bodies did not circulate, and the amount was very small. The blood of zombies contained a strong smell. Of course, this smell could only be smelled by zombies. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.